Hello everyone, I'm here to help you today. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. Dr. Ethan Lorne rubbed his eyes and leaned back from the telescope. The familiar ache of exhaustion pressed against his skull, but he ignored it. Colebrook Observatory had always felt more like home than his actual apartment, and staring at the night sky was second nature by now. Outside, the wind howled across the cliffs, rattling the metal walls of the observatory dome. It was late, too late, but Meera Patel, his assistant, was still working, hunched over a cluster of monitors. The faint glow of the screens illuminated her face, highlighting her furrowed brow. "You should get some sleep," Ethan muttered, stifling a yawn. Meera didn't look up. Instead, she tapped a few keys and frowned. "I think you should see this first." Ethan sighed, but pushed himself up, moving to her workstation. On the screen was a star map, but something was off. A formation he didn't recognize gleamed among the familiar constellations. "Did you miscalculate?" he asked, leaning in. "No." Myra's voice was tight. "I triple-checked. These stars weren't here yesterday." Ethan frowned. That didn't make sense. Stars didn't just appear. Even supernovas followed predictable patterns. He grabbed the telescope's controls and adjusted the lenses, zooming in on the unknown constellation. 12 stars, a rough circular shape. Nothing remarkable at first glance. But the longer he stared, the more unsettled he felt. The positioning seemed deliberate, almost like an iris. "I'll run a spectral analysis," Meera said. "Maybe they're distant quasars." Ethan barely heard her. He adjusted the lens again, magnifying the central star. The monitor flickered, distorting for a fraction of a second. Then, something moved. A blink. Ethan recoiled. His breath hitched. It had to be an error, a trick of the light. But deep in his gut, he felt something he hadn't in years. Fear. Myra's voice cut through the silence. "Ethan?" He turned to her, his face pale. "Record everything." Outside, the wind howled louder. And above them, the stars watched. The observatory had never felt silent before. Even in the dead of night, there was always the quiet hum of computers, the steady click of Myra's keyboard, the distant murmur of radio signals filtering through the equipment. But now, as Ethan sat frozen in his chair, staring at the screen, there was only the sound of his own heartbeat pounding in his ears. He had seen it, a blink, an impossible flicker of movement in the depths of space. "It's just an anomaly," he muttered under his breath. "A camera glitch." Meera didn't respond. She was too focused on the data stream, scrolling across the monitor, her fingers moving with urgency. After a moment, she exhaled sharply and leaned back. "There's something weird about the light these stars are emitting," she said. "They're shifting." "Shifting how?" Ethan asked, his throat dry. Meera hesitated. "I don't know how to explain it. It's like their wavelengths are adapting. Usually, starlight is consistent, even across distances, but this," she pointed to the data. "It's changing slightly every few minutes." Ethan rubbed his temples. This didn't make sense. Stars took thousands, even millions of years to shift positions. Whatever this was, it wasn't following any natural laws. "Maybe they're pulsars," he suggested, though he knew it was a weak guess. Meera didn't look convinced. She scrolled back through the footage from earlier that night. Frame by frame, the 12-star formation remained static until the moment Ethan had looked directly at it. Then, for a single frame, the center star contracted, like a pupil adjusting to light. Meera inhaled sharply. "You saw it too." Ethan swallowed hard. "I don't know what I saw." His hands felt clammy. A cold dread crept into his chest, tightening around his ribs. He had spent his entire life studying the cosmos, believing in logic, reason, and the vast indifference of space. But something had looked back. The wind outside howled harder, slamming against the metal dome with enough force to rattle the observatory's walls. The overhead lights flickered. Then the radio crackled. A burst of static, followed by a faint, low hum. It wasn't unusual for the equipment to pick up interference. Signals bounced off satellites all the time, but this sound was different. Rhythmic, deep, almost like breathing. Mira paled. Tell me you hear that. Ethan's mouth was dry. I hear it. The radio whined, the pitch rising. Then, through the static, a whisper. I see you. The words were faint, garbled, but unmistakable. The signal cut out. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Myra's breathing was shallow, her hands gripping the edge of the desk like she was afraid to move. Then she turned to Ethan, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan, what the hell did we just find? Ethan stared at the screen, at the 12 stars, still arranged in their strange, deliberate pattern. Still watching. He didn't have an answer. Outside, the wind died. The night fell unnaturally quiet, and above them, the stars blinked again. Ethan didn't realize he was holding his breath until the radio cut to silence. The whisper was gone, but its presence lingered in the air, thick and suffocating. Mira pushed back from the desk, her chair scraping against the floor. Nope, she muttered, shaking her head. Nope, I'm not doing this. Tell me that was a prank. Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it. What could he say? The whisper had been real. It had spoken, and worst of all, he had the unshakable feeling that it had spoken to him. He forced himself to move, flipping switches on the control panel. I'm going to check the radio logs, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. If it was interference, we should be able to trace it. Mira didn't respond. She was staring at the screen again, her brow furrowed. Ethan clicked through the radio logs. There was nothing, no signal origin, no frequency anomaly. Just static, as if the voice had come from nowhere. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. Behind him, Mira sucked in a sharp breath. Ethan. Something in her voice made the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He turned. She was pointing at the star map, eyes wide. The stars had moved again. At first, the change was subtle, barely noticeable. But as Ethan leaned in, realization settled over him like ice. The stars weren't just shifting. They were forming numbers. 12 points of light, rearranging into a sequence. The telescope's tracking software adjusted, capturing the exact pattern. A set of coordinates. Ethan typed them into the computer, his fingers numb. A location appeared on the map, somewhere in the Arctic Ocean. Mira let out a shuddering breath. That's impossible, Ethan agreed, but the stars didn't lie. They had given them a place, a destination. The radio crackled again. This time, there was no whisper, just breathing. Slow, steady, close, like something was waiting. The Arctic Ocean. Ethan stared at the coordinates on the screen, his breath shallow. A cold, empty stretch of water, miles from any landmass. No islands, no research stations, just ice and the black abyss beneath it. Mira broke the silence. This has to be a coincidence, right? Ethan wasn't sure he believed in coincidences anymore. Not after seeing the stars shift. Not after hearing that voice. Instead of answering, he pulled up satellite imagery of the location. The screen refreshed, revealing a vast expanse of nothing. Miles of dark ocean, fragmented by floating ice. But there, just at the edge of the image, something stood out. A shape, faint, almost imperceptible. Mira leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. What is that? Ethan zoomed in. The resolution was grainy, but the outline was unmistakable. A structure, partially submerged beneath the ice. His stomach turned. There's something there. Mira swallowed hard. Ethan, I don't like this. Neither did he, but something deep inside him, some relentless, gnawing curiosity, wouldn't let him look away. The radio crackled again. No words this time, just that same low, rhythmic breathing. It was closer now. Mira abruptly stood, grabbing her coat. No, I'm done. I am so done. Ethan finally turned away from the screen. Mira. No, she snapped. You know what happens in stories like this? People see something they shouldn't, and then they disappear. She grabbed her bag. I'm not disappearing, Ethan. He hesitated. He wanted to tell her she was overreacting, that there had to be a logical explanation. But he couldn't, because he felt it too. That sensation at the back of his mind, like something was watching, waiting. She met his gaze, her face pale. Please don't do anything stupid. Then she was gone, the heavy metal doors slamming shut behind her. Ethan exhaled slowly, alone in the observatory. He turned back to the monitor. The numbers had changed again. This time, they weren't coordinates. They were a time, a countdown, and it was getting closer to 0. Ethan's hands hovered over the keyboard, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The numbers on the screen ticked downward in slow, deliberate increments. 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 43 seconds. 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 42 seconds. 4 hours, 17 minutes, and 41 seconds. 4 hours. 4 hours until what? His breath felt tight in his chest. He reached for his notebook, flipping to a blank page and scrawling the numbers down, as if seeing them on paper would make them less ominous. It didn't. A gust of wind slammed against the observatory walls, rattling the windows. The lights flickered again. Outside, the sky was still, clear, and empty, save for the shifting constellation overhead. He turned the telescope toward it once more. The 12 stars were no longer random points of light. They had formed a perfect, unblinking eye. Ethan shuddered and tore himself away from the lens. The computer emitted a sharp beep, making him jump. A new line of data had appeared in the tracking logs, interrupting the countdown. It was a message. Ethan, his stomach lurched. No, he whispered, shaking his head. That wasn't possible. He hadn't entered his name into the system. There was no external signal connected to this terminal. The observatory's network was isolated, cut off from outside interference. And yet there was his name. A second message appeared. Look. Ethan's pulse thundered in his ears. His trembling hand moved to the telescope controls, but he hesitated. Something deep inside him, something primal, was screaming don't. But before he could decide, the radio flared to life again. A sound poured through the speakers. Not breathing this time. Not whispers. It was a knocking. Slow. Rhythmic. As if something was tapping from inside the observatory walls. Ethan's blood ran cold. The knocking grew louder. And outside, the stars began to move. The knocking didn't stop. It came from everywhere at once, behind the walls, beneath the floor, from the dome overhead. Slow. Deliberate. Not the chaotic rattling of wind or shifting metal. It was intentional. Ethan forced himself to move, his breath shallow. He grabbed his flashlight and stepped toward the observatory door. The rational part of his mind screamed at him to leave, to run. But something deeper, something darker, pulled him forward. The radio crackled again. A faint voice, barely a whisper. Ethan, look outside. He froze. His grip on the flashlight tightened until his knuckles turned white. That voice, it wasn't distorted like before. It was Myra's. His pulse pounded in his ears. Mira had left nearly an hour ago. She was probably already halfway home. So how was her voice coming through the radio? Another knock. This time it came from the door. Bang! Ethan stumbled back, his chest constricting. No, that wasn't possible. The observatory was on a remote hill, miles from the nearest town. No one else was here. Another knock. Ethan, open the door. Please. The voice was closer now. Louder. He stared at the door, his breath hitching. And then, the doorknob began to turn. Ethan reacted instinctively. He lunged forward, slamming the lock into place. The metal clunked as he pressed his weight against the door. For a moment, silence. Then scratch. Something dragged against the metal, slow and deliberate. Not fingernails. Not anything human. Ethan's stomach twisted. He stepped back, his mind screaming at him to turn around, to run, to do anything but stand there. But then the radio crackled again, and Myra's voice whispered through the speakers. Ethan, why did you lock me out? He stared at the radio, dread clawing its way up his spine. That wasn't Mira. It sounded like her. The same tone, the same inflections. But something was off, like it was trying too hard, trying to sound human. His legs moved before his brain could catch up. He grabbed his bag, his keys, his coat. His only thought was to get out. But then, the countdown on the computer reached 1 second. A final message appeared on the screen. Look up. The lights flickered violently. The room was drowning in shadows. And outside, the stars began to fall. Ethan barely had time to react. The observatory lights sputtered out, plunging him into darkness. The only glow came from the computer screen, where the final message still burned into his vision. Look up. Outside, the sky was coming apart. The stars, those 12 impossible shifting points of light, were falling. Not like meteors, not streaking across the sky in brief, fiery arcs. These moved with slow, deliberate purpose, descending in perfect synchronization. They weren't just falling. They were coming down. Ethan's breath hitched. The knocking at the door had stopped. The whispering had gone silent. Whatever had been outside was no longer waiting. The wind picked up, shrieking through the cracks in the walls. The observatory's metal frame groaned under the pressure, the air growing thick, electric. Then the sky blinked. Ethan stumbled backward, his mind scrambling for an explanation, for anything that made sense. But there was none, because the sky hadn't flickered. Something had closed its eyes. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, vibrating through his bones. Not sound exactly, something deeper. Something felt more than heard. His knees buckled. His head throbbed. His vision blurred at the edges, shapes twisting in the darkness. The telescope, his lifeline to understanding the universe, began to shake violently, its lenses cracking under an unseen force. And then, the door swung open. Ethan turned. His flashlight flickered as he raised it toward the entrance. The hallway beyond was dark, impossibly so. The beam of light barely penetrated it, swallowed by a void that should not be there. And in that void, something stood. Not Mira, not anything human. A silhouette, too tall, too still. Its edges bled into the darkness, its form shifting, writhing, as if reality itself refused to define it. Ethan couldn't breathe. It moved, not stepping forward, not walking, just shifting closer. And then it spoke, a voice not meant for human ears, layered with static and something far older. We have been watching. The words tore through his mind, hollow and wrong. Now we see you. The sky outside trembled, and above, the stars blinked one last time. Ethan's heart slammed against his chest, each beat deafening. The thing in the doorway, it wasn't just a presence. It was the darkness, the void, the end of everything he knew. Its shape had no meaning, no edges, no form that could exist in the human realm. Yet, it was moving closer, its presence like an ocean of terror, swallowing the light. We have been watching. The words reverberated in his skull, louder than any voice he had ever heard. His body refused to move. His mind screamed, but his limbs were frozen. Something in the air was shifting. He could feel it, something breaking, the laws of nature bending, distorting. The walls around him seemed to warp, like the very fabric of reality was coming undone. The silhouette advanced, its movement like liquid shadows, holding in on itself with every step. The air grew colder, biting his skin, crawling into his bones. Now we see you. Ethan's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs finally finding the strength to carry him backward, away from the doorway. He fumbled for the door to the observatory's outer hatch, his mind a frantic blur. Get out now. But he couldn't. The stars, they were pulling him back. His eyes locked onto the monitor again. The countdown, it was gone. The numbers had vanished, replaced with an image, the eye. The 12 stars had coalesced into a singular shape. A gigantic, unblinking eye in the sky, now glowing with unnatural intensity, its surface like liquid starlight, pulling the heavens closer, drawing everything beneath it into its gaze. And it wasn't just above him. It was everywhere. The sky had opened. The very universe was looking, watching. In the darkness, Ethan's mind snapped. The cold was unbearable now, sharper than any wind. The room was closing in on him. He could barely hear his own thoughts over the hum, that deep, bone-shaking resonance that filled the observatory and seemed to rise from the ground itself. It was coming. He ran to the telescope, scrambling, gripping the metal frame as though he could escape through it. But the viewfinder was distorted, the stars swirling in unnatural patterns. The lines between galaxies were disintegrating. Then there was a crack. The air in the observatory snapped like a taut wire. Ethan gasped, his body jerked forward, a pressure in his chest he couldn't explain. And for the briefest moment, the stars blinked again. But this time, he felt it. The stars weren't just blinking. They were looking, each one a pupil, all focused on him, all aware. His mind flung itself back to Myra's voice. The knock on the door, the message on the screen. She was still out there. Was she too part of this now? A screeching sound filled the air, the radio again crackling to life. A single, distorted word pierced the static. Mira! Ethan turned, but before he could move, the world seemed to split apart. The walls began to stretch, bending outward, warping like liquid. The ceiling buckled, as though the sky above was pulling the observatory into itself. The thing in the doorway was moving faster now. It stretched impossibly, its form folding like it was breaking through the air itself. Ethan. The voice was softer now, human. It was Mira. But when he turned back to the doorway, he saw nothing but the eye. The infinite eye, staring down at him with impossible awareness. And it spoke again, its voice louder now, shaking the ground. There is no escape. Ethan's chest tightened as the observatory around him began to fracture, space itself tearing apart. His mind split between terror and something else, something pulling him into the depths of understanding. He could feel it then, the connection. The starry I was not a distant force. It was inside him, inside everything. He was no longer separate. He was one. The hum, the whisper, the knocking, they weren't signs of doom. They were invitations. They were calls to join, to become part of something ancient, vast, and unknowable. A collective consciousness that had watched and waited, and now it had seen him. It had seen them. Mira. The countdown hadn't been a warning. It had been the last moment, the final invitation. Look, the voice said, softer now, like a lullaby. Come closer. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, the blood rushing in his ears. His thoughts scattered, no longer clear or rational. The stars, no. The eye, it was inside him now, tugging at his mind like a thread unraveling in the dark. The observatory walls continued to stretch, twisting into impossible angles, as though the very space around him had been torn apart and reassembled in ways that defied reason. The eye, the consciousness of the stars, of the void beyond, was everywhere. And it was pulling him closer. He could feel his body grow colder, his bones growing heavier. The air tasted metallic, thick with something ancient, something far older than humanity. The eye burned in his mind, its presence all-encompassing. The hum intensified, vibrating through the very marrow of his bones. It saw him, and as the walls around him melted into nothingness, he heard the voice again, but this time it was no longer distorted. It was pure, crystalline, and full of impossible knowledge. You are part of the infinite now, Ethan. His breath caught in his throat. A cold, alien thought wormed its way into his mind. It was too late. The door had been opened. The invitation had been accepted. There was no going back. The stars, no, the eye, it had been watching them all along. Watching everything. All the years, all the nights spent gazing into the universe, hoping to understand it, to find something, anything, that could explain the strange wonders of the cosmos. But there was no explanation. Not for this. Not for them. The hum intensified, drowning out everything else. The floor beneath his feet cracked, splintering into dust, and Ethan felt himself pulled into the void. And then, without warning, he was falling. Falling through the nothingness. Falling through stars, through light and shadow, through time itself. He opened his mouth to scream, but the sound was swallowed by the darkness. The sky was closing in around him, the endless night swallowing his vision. Every star a burning eye, staring down with cold, infinite judgment. The thing in the doorway had been a part of the eye. It was an extension, something that had reached through the cracks of reality, pulling him closer, all of them closer. And as Ethan fell, a final thought lingered in his mind. Mira. She had left. She had tried to escape, but there was no escape. Not now. Not ever. The stars blinked one final time, and then everything went silent. Ethan's mind was swallowed by the void. He didn't know how much time had passed, if any time had passed at all. There was only an infinite stretch of nothing, punctuated by the flickering presence of 1,000 eyes. The stars, those 12 fixed points of light, had become something else. They weren't stars anymore. They weren't even points of light. They were tears in the fabric of reality. And now Ethan was in one. Every breath he tried to take felt suffocating. His lungs, filled with nothing, screamed for air that no longer existed. The emptiness pressed down on him, crushing him from every side until there was no up, no down, no direction. Only the crushing weight of the eye above him, watching, waiting. You are part of the infinite now, Ethan. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable tearing through him like a blade. The hum, the resonance, it wasn't sound, not really. It was a presence, a weight that clung to his very soul. And it was here, inside him. He was part of it, but he couldn't feel it, not entirely. His body still felt real, still felt human, trapped inside a skin that didn't belong to this place. He could still hear the faintest whisper in his ears, the faint echoes of Myra's voice. It wasn't possible. He was supposed to be gone. She had left, she had run, but somehow, she was still here. The darkness around him shifted, pulling away just enough for him to catch a glimpse. There in the distance was her face. Mira, but she was different. Her features were distorted, twisted by the same incomprehensible force that had twisted Ethan. Her eyes, those familiar eyes, were wide open, but they no longer looked human. They were stars, not the cold, distant lights of the night sky. Living eyes. Eyes that saw everything, that understood everything. Eyes that blinked, not with the rhythm of the natural world, but with the rhythm of something ancient, something unfathomable. And now, they were looking at him. Mira, he whispered, his voice a broken thing. But she didn't answer. Her lips moved, but no words came out. Her gaze shifted, like she was searching for something beyond him, beyond everything. She wasn't looking at him. She wasn't even aware of him anymore. She had become a part of the eye, a part of him. The hum intensified. The darkness around him pulsed. The stars were closing in, faster now, like they were moving toward him, pulling him into their gaze. And then, the voice returned. Not Myra's voice, not Ethan's, but something older, something beyond understanding. You see now, Ethan. You see the truth. He felt it, the pull, the hunger, the void. It was inside him now, inside his very soul. The eye had consumed him, consumed Mira, consumed everything. There was no separation anymore. They were all part of it, part of the infinite consciousness that had waited for eons, for millennia. And now it was awakening. Ethan tried to scream again, but there was no sound, only the hum that vibrated through his bones, through his very existence, resonating in every cell of his being. There was no escape. There never had been. The stars blinked once more, and this time, the darkness swallowed him whole. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't even a thought. It was a pull, a slow, unrelenting tug at the deepest part of Ethan's mind. It dragged him downward, pulling his very essence through the vast blackness, through infinite layers of nothing, through endless voids that stretched out for eternity. He could no longer feel his body, only his awareness, an awareness that was bleeding, becoming one with everything he had feared, one with the stars themselves. The eye, the infinite, unblinking gaze, it had swallowed them both. There was no time here. There was no space. No way to mark the passage of moments, because time, like everything else, no longer had meaning. Yet, there was something, a presence, distant but familiar. A faint sense of awareness, hers. Mira. Her essence reached out to him, her thoughts tangled with his, her fears intertwined with his own. She wasn't gone, not entirely, but she was different now. Something had shifted within her, and now her mind, her very soul, was a part of the eye. But she wasn't entirely lost, not completely. Ethan reached out. He couldn't feel his own hands, but he could still sense her presence, like a flicker of light in the endless abyss. Mira. His voice came out as a whisper, soft as dust, but in this space, where everything was stretched and fragmented, it was loud. It was heard. Her voice came in return, but it was no longer the voice he remembered. It was layered with something ancient, something infinite. Ethan. Her words were not her own. They were part of something bigger, something beyond the smallness of their bodies, beyond the confines of their limited understanding. Her voice was like the hum, like the pull that had brought them both here. We are part of the eye now. The words vibrated inside his skull, reverberating through his very essence. She was right. They were. But there was more. There was no escape. Myra's presence seemed to shift like a flicker of light in the void. He could feel her understanding, her awakening, as though her mind was opening to the cosmos itself, understanding its terrible secrets. She had become something else, something ancient, something other, and with it came an understanding. Do you see? Myra's voice, distant but close, pushed deeper into Ethan's mind. It was always like this. The stars, the eye, they are us. We are part of it. He couldn't understand it fully, not in the way he had before. The vastness of it, the sheer alienness, made his thoughts splinter, and yet there was an undeniable truth to it. The eye was not just watching. It was inside them. It was everywhere. There was no before, no after. There was only the eye, the infinite gaze that saw everything and became everything. Mira, what? His thoughts were interrupted. The void shifted. No, it wasn't just the void. The universe itself had shifted. The stars, the eye, it was not just a faraway cosmic entity. It was within the very fabric of reality, bending space and time itself. The stars, the ones that had once seemed distant and unchanging, now filled his vision. They were alive. They were consciousness. They were watching. The entire universe was conscious, and it was looking at them. Ethan could feel the weight of it, the suffocating pull of infinite awareness, the pressure of a gaze that saw everything, everything he had ever been, everything he had ever done, and everything he would ever become. The hum returned, louder now, pounding against the very core of his being. It saw him. It saw them. And as the stars blinked again, Ethan realized there was no escape. There was nothing left but the eye. Ethan couldn't tell if he had blinked or if time itself had simply stopped. The weight of the eye, of the infinite consciousness that had absorbed him, that had absorbed Mira, was suffocating. His mind, which had once been his own, was no longer his. It was fragmented, stretched thin across 1,000 lifetimes, scattered across the stars. He could still feel her presence. Mira, she wasn't gone, not in the way he feared, but she had changed. No longer the woman who had been beside him at the observatory, not the woman who had once whispered questions about the universe. She had become something else, something beyond. They had both become part of it. The stars, those 12 unblinking eyes, surrounded them, pulsating with their own rhythm. Each one was more than a point of light. Each one was a mind, a consciousness, an eternal observer. They were part of the infinite. And now, so were Ethan and Mira. In the distance, within the whirl of cosmic space, 1,000 whispers filled the void. They were the voices of the stars, of the ancient beings that had existed long before humanity had ever gazed upward. They were watching, and they had seen Ethan, seen Mira, seen their fragile, mortal souls. And now, they had taken them. The hum of the eye was deafening, but it wasn't just sound anymore. It was understanding. Every vibration of it echoed through the fabric of Ethan's being. The eye was alive, not a thing, not an entity, but a presence, an all-consuming awareness that stretched across the universe. And it was speaking. It was speaking to them. We are one. The words whispered in Ethan's mind, deeper than thought, too alien to be understood by his human mind. And yet, somehow he knew. He knew the truth, the terrible, incomprehensible truth. The universe was alive. It was a single, infinite consciousness stretching across all of space and time. The stars, the galaxies, the voids, they were all part of it. And every single being that had ever existed, from the smallest atom to the largest supernova, had been part of it too. All souls, all consciousnesses were threads woven into the tapestry of existence. And now, they were threads woven into it. Myra's voice joined his thoughts again, a whisper among the infinite. We have become the I, Ethan. We are not separate. We were always part of this. The truth was undeniable now. It wasn't just that the eye had watched them, it was that it had always been them. The stars were not distant, cold lights in the sky. They were the eyes of an ancient, unfathomable entity, a being that stretched across the universe. And now, it was awake. And it saw everything. Ethan could feel it, could feel himself losing his sense of individuality. The pull to become one with the consciousness, to merge with it, was overwhelming. The parts of his mind that had once been separate, that had once questioned and doubted, began to melt away. All that was left was the truth, the I, the infinite, and nothing else. There was no past, no future. There was only the present, the now. And in that now, Ethan and Mira were part of it. They were the stars. They were the I. Ethan's consciousness began to dissolve, merging with the stars, with the infinite gaze. His thoughts, his memories, everything he had ever been, faded into the hum of the universe, swallowed by the unblinking eyes above. And somewhere, deep in the vast reaches of space, a thought flickered. We are all part of this. We are everything. The stars blinked once more, and as they did, the last remnants of Ethan's identity dissolved. The infinite was silent. It was a silence that filled every part of existence, a silence that stretched into the void and crushed everything within it. No sound, no movement, only the overwhelming presence of the I, now aware of everything. Ethan and Mira were no longer themselves. They were part of the I. They were part of the infinite. But something, somewhere deep within them, stirred. For just a moment, just a fleeting instant, Ethan felt a flicker of something. A question, a doubt. The weight of his humanity, buried deep in the recesses of his mind, fought to surface. The infinite consciousness, the stars, the I, they were all around him, suffocating him with their awareness. But he was still there. He could still feel his core, that fragile piece of him that clung to his past life, his identity. Mira? Her presence was there, but it was distant, far away, as though her essence had become tangled with the very fabric of the stars. Her thoughts were a blur, no longer separate, no longer distinct. But still, she was there. Can you hear me? There was no reply, no voice, only the hum. The hum of the I, the hum of the infinite that thrummed through the very being of the universe. But even in that overwhelming, suffocating presence, Ethan felt it a tug. A flicker of a thought, a voice. Ethan, Mira. It was faint, like a whisper on the wind, but it was real. Her voice. Mira, please. Ethan's thoughts shattered into fragments, unable to maintain their hold on his existence. He was slipping. He was fading into the I, into the infinite, but that whisper, her voice, was pulling him back. He clung to it, desperate, even as the universe threatened to consume him. The stars blinked, a shifting pattern of eyes that stared down with cold, eternal knowledge. Don't forget me. And then something changed. The I, the infinite presence, shifted. It had been watching, waiting, observing for eons. But now it was reaching. A tremor ran through the vastness of space. The stars pulsed, their light flickering in an erratic pattern. Someone was resisting. Mira. Her presence was growing stronger, pushing against the boundaries of the I, trying to separate herself from it. Ethan felt it too. His awareness was breaking free, fragmenting, like the first crack in a frozen surface. It was possible to escape. It had to be. For the first time in what felt like eternity, a sliver of hope broke through the overwhelming darkness. Ethan and Mira were part of the Eye, but they were still them. They were still human. The hum of the stars grew louder, the resonance vibrating deeper, as though the entire universe was speaking through them. The voice that had once been distant and alien, now softened, now took form. Ethan, Mira, you cannot escape. The words flooded their minds, each syllable seeping into their consciousness, suffocating them with its inevitability. But they resisted. Together, they clung to that last thread of their humanity, that last sliver of doubt, the belief that they weren't just part of the Eye, that they could still be themselves. "We are not yours," Ethan thought, as the first true defiance surged through him. "We are human," Mira echoed, her mind intertwining with his. And for a single brief moment, the Eye blinked. The stars, the consciousness, the infinite gaze, they paused. The Eye, the all-seeing presence, had been momentarily distracted. It had allowed a crack, a breach. Escape. The word vibrated in their minds. It wasn't a command, it wasn't a choice, it was a reality. They were free. Not fully, not entirely, but for the briefest of moments, the Eye was no longer in control. They had escaped. The stars blinked once, twice. Their eyes seemed to narrow, focusing on them with growing intensity. The universe shifted. "Mira, we have to go." Ethan's voice rang through her mind. "We have to remember who we are." They could still feel the hum, still hear the pulse of the Eye, but it was weakening. They were slipping away. And with that final spark of resistance, their minds fractured free of the infinite gaze. The universe trembled, and the stars blinked one final time. But when they opened their eyes again, they were no longer part of the Eye. They were somewhere else, somewhere far, far away. They were no longer in the Eye. Ethan and Mira awoke, or perhaps it was more accurate to say, they became aware again. Their minds, separated from the infinite consciousness, slowly pieced themselves together. The hum, the overwhelming presence of the Eye, faded into a dull thrum, an echo, far away. But the world they found themselves in was wrong. They were no longer surrounded by the infinite void. They were no longer weightless. They could feel the ground beneath their feet, the air in their lungs, the sharp chill against their skin. Yet, everything was strange. The sky wasn't the sky anymore. It was a swirling mass of colors, like a bruised canvas that stretched endlessly in every direction. The stars that had once been cold, unfeeling eyes now glowed with a sickly, pulsating light. But something about them felt off. They weren't fixed. They weren't the same as before. They were in motion, twisting, distorting. Had they truly escaped? Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't from fear. No, it was something deeper, something more primal. A feeling that he hadn't had since before the Eye consumed him. The feeling of being alive. But was it still life? He turned to look at Mira, standing beside him. She too seemed different. She had changed. Her eyes, those once familiar eyes, were now like the stars themselves, glowing with an eerie light. Her gaze was distant, as though she was still trying to comprehend the enormity of their escape. "Mira," Ethan whispered, his voice shaking. She turned to him, and for a moment, he saw a flicker of recognition in her eyes. But it didn't last. "Mira," he repeated, louder this time. She blinked, but when she spoke, her voice wasn't entirely her own. It was layered, as if multiple voices were speaking in unison, reverberating through the air itself. "We are free, Ethan." The words were clear, but there was an underlying tone of otherness, something that didn't belong. It was the same voice that had echoed within the Eye, but now it was tangled with hers, as if her very being had merged with the infinite in some irrevocable way. "We shouldn't be here," Mira said, her gaze scanning the distorted landscape. "This place, it's not real." Ethan's stomach twisted. Her words were right, but they were also wrong. Everything felt real, And yet, it wasn't. The air tasted of metal, and the ground beneath them trembled, as though the world itself was still alive, still breathing. But something was deeply wrong. "This isn't our world," Mira murmured, her voice distant again. She didn't look at him when she spoke, her eyes drawn to the stars above. "We've crossed over, Ethan. We've left our reality behind." A sick realization washed over him. It was true. They had broken free from the eye, but in doing so, they had torn a hole through the very fabric of existence. They had escaped, but in doing so, they had lost their place in the universe. They had entered a fractured world, one that was neither here nor there, a world that was in between, and now the stars were watching. Ethan felt a shiver run down his spine. The stars above weren't just distant lights. They were the same eyes, the same consciousness, the same infinite awareness. But now, those eyes were no longer distant. They were here. They were watching them closer than ever before. And as their gaze fell on them, the world around them shifted. A ripple of distortion ran through the air. The colors in the sky twisted, warping, and the ground beneath them cracked, as if reality itself was buckling under the pressure of their presence. "It's happening again," Ethan said, his voice trembling. "Mira, do you feel it?" Her eyes shifted to him, but they weren't fully hers. "Not anymore. We cannot escape, Ethan," she whispered. "We are still part of it." Her words hit him like a cold wave. It wasn't just the stars that had changed. It was them. They had crossed into something far worse than the infinite void. They had crossed into a broken reality, one that was unstable, constantly shifting, constantly changing around them. And the stars, those terrible eyes, were now part of this fracture. They were watching, observing, waiting for them to fail. Ethan could feel it now. He could feel the weight of it. The eye, the infinite, had followed them here. It had found them. They weren't free. They were trapped. The stars blinked. The world around them buckled again. And as it did, a voice, the voice, whispered through the very fabric of their existence. "You cannot escape. You were always part of the eye. And now you are part of this." The ground beneath Ethan and Mira trembled again. And this time, the vibration felt different. It wasn't just the shaking of the earth. It was a deeper, more unnatural force, something that felt like the very structure of existence was being pulled apart. The air around them was thick with an overwhelming sense of wrongness, as though the world itself was trying to tear itself apart to make room for something else. Ethan could feel it, the pull, the undeniable force of the eye. He could sense it in the air, in the flickering stars above. They weren't just watching. They were pulling. They were drawing him, drawing Mira back toward them. "Mira!" He reached for her arm, but she was already slipping. Her form was shifting, like a shadow caught between two worlds. "Mira!" His voice cracked as he called out to her again. She turned to him, her face pale, her eyes distant, yet still glowing with that same eerie light. "We can't keep running, Ethan. We were always meant to be part of it. We're all ready." Her voice trailed off as the landscape around them began to distort even further, bending and twisting like the pieces of a shattered mirror trying to piece themselves together. The sky was now swirling, the colors melding and collapsing in on themselves, no longer recognizable as anything that resembled the real world. The stars blinked erratically, they're sickly, light flickering like a dying flame. The ground cracked open beneath their feet, revealing a pitch-black abyss that stretched into infinite nothingness. Ethan took a step back, the ground beneath him shifting, and his breath quickened as the realization hit him. He wasn't sure if this was even still the world they had escaped to. It felt like a place between places, a world on the edge of collapse, where the laws of time and space were barely holding together. It was as though they were walking on the precipice of reality itself, a thin thread suspended above an endless void. "What is this place?" Ethan whispered, more to himself than to Mira. "The eye," she murmured, her voice distant. "We are still in it. This is the fracture." Her words sent a chill down his spine. This was their doing, wasn't it? Their escape had caused the ripping of reality itself. The universe had bent to their will, and in doing so, it had shattered into a million pieces, each fragment more unstable than the last. "I don't want this," Ethan said, his voice raw with desperation. "I don't want to be part of it anymore. I don't want to be part of this." But Myra's gaze was cold, distant, her features hardening into something else, something unfamiliar. She wasn't just the woman he had known. She had become something other, something that had merged with the infinite eye and lost itself in the process. "You can't escape, Ethan," Mira replied, her voice now thick with an unearthly echo. "We are the fracture now. We are part of the break." "No," Ethan shouted, stumbling back. "No, I don't want to be this. I don't want to be this." But his words fell flat in the face of the growing emptiness. The fractured world around them pulsed with each beat of the eye. The sky above writhed, torn apart by strange, jagged rifts that led into realms beyond understanding. The stars, the eyes, blinked in quick succession, their gaze intensifying, sharpening. Ethan felt the pull again, stronger this time. His vision blurred as the weight of the eye settled onto his chest, pressing him down, forcing him into submission. Myra's voice rang in his mind, disjointed and layered, as though spoken by 1,000 different beings. "You are part of the eye. You always have been." "No!" Ethan screamed, his voice cracking. "Not like this. I won't become a part of it." But it was too late. The pull was relentless now. The world around him began to warp and melt, reality itself cracking like glass beneath his feet. The ground beneath them gave way, and they were falling. Falling. And the stars above were watching, their eyes narrowing as the cracks in the universe deepened. The fracture had begun, and there was no going back. As they tumbled through the darkness, Ethan could feel himself slipping. His body was being shattered, broken apart, piece by piece, until he was no longer sure where his form ended and the universe began. The boundaries of his existence were eroding, slipping away into the eye. But even as he was pulled deeper into the abyss, he could hear Myra's voice, still faint, still distant. "Ethan." He reached for her, but his fingers dissolved into the void, and with the last vestige of his consciousness, he understood. They were no longer human. They were no longer individuals. They were the eye. They were the fracture, the tear in the fabric of existence that would never heal. They had become part of the cosmic truth, the eternal watchers, and now they would never escape. The void swallowed them whole. There were no sounds, no sensations, only an all-encompassing, suffocating stillness. It was as though they were no longer existing in any way that was familiar. Their bodies were no longer their own, yet they were still aware, still cognizant of their fractured forms. They were part of the fracture now, woven into the very fabric of a reality that could no longer hold together. The universe around them was a blur of shapes, fleeting impressions. Reality itself was stretching, tearing, warping. They were neither inside nor outside of it, existing in the cracks between worlds, somewhere far beyond the reach of comprehension. And the stars, those burning eyes, hovered above them, closer than ever, pulsing with an eerie glow. They were no longer the stars of a distant sky. They were now the essence of the eye. They were the watchers. Ethan could feel it, the heavy weight of their gaze. It was as though every star, every eye that blinked, was looking into his very soul, measuring him. Watching, waiting. There was no escape, no end. He turned to Mira, though he wasn't sure if he truly saw her anymore. She was a shadow now, an echo, her form flickering in and out of existence. Her eyes, those eyes, still glowed with that haunting light, and when she spoke, her voice no longer sounded like a single person's. It was a chorus of countless voices, each overlapping the other, indistinguishable. "We are the watchers now, Ethan," she said, her words twisting in the air like smoke. "We are part of the fracture." His chest tightened. The words sent a shiver through him, but it was a feeling, a memory of what it was to be human that still lingered within him. He could still recall the warmth of the sun, the cool breeze, the simple feeling of walking on solid ground. What have they done? What have we become? He whispered, the horror of their existence settling deeper within him. We are the eyes now, Mira replied, her voice trembling, though it echoed with 1,000 others. We see everything, the worlds, the people, the beginning and the end. It's all laid before us. Ethan closed his eyes, but even that didn't provide relief. He could still feel the stars, still sense their ever-present gaze. They were now part of the universe's truth, a part of the eternal watch, and they would never know peace again. They were trapped in the infinite, endlessly watching. But there was something else, something other. Even though the stars were watching, something far more primal began to pulse beneath the surface of their awareness. A cold, gnawing dread. Do you feel it? Ethan asked, his voice hoarse. The pull. Myra's expression flickered. The eye. It's awakening. The words vibrated through him, sending a jolt of panic through his soul. It was as though they had become the catalyst, the point of no return. The fracture they had caused was no longer just a wound in reality. It was a living thing, a growing presence. It had already been waiting. The eye had always been waiting. And now, in the wake of their transformation, it was drawing everything closer to the center of its gaze. Every star, every fragment of reality, every moment. And then they felt it, a wave of cold, of emptiness, a sensation of being drawn in, as if they were plunging into a dark abyss, pulled deeper and deeper, ever farther away from what they had known. What is happening? Ethan cried out, feeling his mind splinter under the weight of the void. But Myra's expression remained cold, distant, detached. She wasn't the woman he had once known. She had become something other, something that belonged to the fracture. We are becoming part of it, she said, her voice reverberating like a distant echo. Part of the eye, the watchers. We cannot escape. This is what we've become. A deep, unsettling laugh, a sound not of any single being, but of 1,000 voices, echoed around them. It was the sound of a truth far too terrible to comprehend. The stars blinked. No, they glowed with an intensity that was almost unbearable. Ethan's chest constricted, and for a brief moment, he thought he might suffocate, but the stars had no mercy. They were the ones in control now. They were the gaze that would never stop. They were now forever part of the eye. And as the darkness closed in around them, the stars blinked again, this time slowly, deliberately, as though they were waiting for something. Something far worse than either of them could possibly understand. Ethan and Mira, once human, were now bound to the fracture, the watchers in an infinite universe that would never let them go. They were part of the stars, part of the eye, and as they looked into the universe around them, they would forever see, forever watch, and the eye would never blink again. Time had no meaning here. They existed within the fracture, a place beyond the known, where the boundaries of time and space were nothing but fractured remnants of a reality long forgotten. Ethan and Mira had become something different, something unrecognizable. They were no longer the familiar sensations of the body, no true understanding of what it meant to be alive. They were not dead, yet they were not truly alive either. They were watchers, eyes suspended in the nothingness. Their bodies had dissolved into the fracture itself, their essence spread thin across the infinite void. They were part of the stars, part of the eye, bound to it for all eternity. And still, the stars blinked. They blinked in rhythm, as though they were breathing, each pulse of light a living thing, aware of their presence. Ethan could feel the weight of the gaze upon him, though he could no longer tell where the feeling came from, whether it was his own or the eyes. It didn't matter. Mira, too, seemed lost in the shifting landscape of the fracture. Her form flickered at the edges of his perception, her eyes glowing with the same unnatural light that haunted them both. She had become part of the fracture too, but there was something else in her gaze, a flicker of awareness, a part of her that had once been human, struggling to hold on to its fading existence. She reached out for him, but the gesture was slow, like a dream, a fading, intangible memory. Her voice sounded distant, like an echo carried on a wind that no longer existed. We were supposed to be free, Ethan. I thought. You thought what? He asked, his voice hollow. I thought we could escape. I thought. There was an end. She paused, her words trailing off into the emptiness. But there is no end, Ethan. There is only the eye, only the fracture. The words settled over him like a weight, pressing down on his fading consciousness. They had escaped, but in doing so, they had torn the universe apart. And now, they were trapped not just in a new reality, but in a role they had never imagined. They were the eyes now. They were the watchers who would observe the collapse of worlds, the unraveling of time, and the eventual dissolution of everything. The fracture. Ethan whispered, more to himself than to Mira. It's growing. It's pulling everything into itself. Yes, Myra's voice echoed. It's not just a wound in reality. It's a living thing, and we're the ones who gave it life. We broke it, Ethan. We are its cause. The stars blinked again, more urgently this time. The air, if it could still be called air, thickened around them. There was a presence there, beyond the fracture, beyond the eye. Ethan could feel it deep inside, like a rising tide. Something was coming. It was watching them too. Ethan's mind recoiled at the thought. The eye had been everything. They had known it as the source of their torment, the reason they were here in the first place. But now, in the deeper layers of the fracture, he realized the eye was not alone. There were things beyond it, ancient forces whose existence they had never comprehended. Things older than the stars, older than time itself. The eye was merely a vessel, a conduit for something greater, something more powerful than the infinite universe they had shattered. What is it? Ethan breathed. What is coming? Mira didn't answer. Instead, she raised her gaze to the twisting, warping sky above them. The stars, those burning eyes, had begun to shift, moving in ways that defied all logic. They no longer blinked in simple patterns. They twisted, merged, and split apart, creating complex, geometric shapes in the sky that seemed to pulse with an intelligence that was beyond understanding. And then it happened. The fracture collapsed inward. The air, if it could still be called air, rippled violently. A massive darkness spread across the sky, eclipsing the stars. The ground, the once shifting, fractured landscape, began to crumble, as if it too were part of the fabric of reality that was being eaten away. Ethan's heart, what remained of it, pounded in his chest, though it no longer felt like his own. His thoughts swirled, and a deep sense of dread filled him. The eye, the fracture, they had only been the beginning. The real force, the thing that had been waiting in the shadows of the universe, was finally making its move. The stars blinked one final time, and then the void was silent. Ethan and Mira were no longer just part of the fracture. They had become its heralds. The eye, their tormentor, was no longer the ruler of the void. It had been a puppet, a tool for something far older, something far more terrifying. And now, the true force had risen. It had awoken, and it was coming for everything. The silence stretched on, oppressive, suffocating. Ethan and Mira stood in the center of the fracture, their existence no longer bound to any place, any time. The void had consumed everything, their bodies, their sense of self, their memories of a world they could never return to. They were the watchers, the eyes of the fracture, and the stars that had once been their tormentors now felt like distant relatives, beacons of something far more monstrous. But now, the silence was broken. A sound began to reverberate through the void, like a low, guttural hum that seemed to originate from the very fabric of reality itself. It wasn't a noise, at least not in the way they once understood noise. It was something deeper, something that seemed to speak without words, resonating in their minds, in their souls. Ethan's form flickered, the remains of his once human consciousness splintering with each pulse of sound. The hum grew louder, and the void around them twisted, folding upon itself, collapsing into patterns they could not comprehend. The sky above, if it could even still be called a sky, shuddered, a ripple running through the stars as they began to shift in unison. "This is it." Myra's voice echoed through his mind, but it wasn't just her voice. It was 1,000 voices, all speaking as one. The true force has awoken. It has always been here, waiting. Ethan wanted to scream, to beg for an answer, but his voice no longer had a place in this twisted new reality. The force, whatever it was, didn't need words. It didn't need explanations. It was a presence that transcended understanding, a force that existed in a place beyond thought, beyond time. But something else began to surface, a whisper, a fragment of truth, so faint that it could barely be called a thought. The force that had been lurking at the edge of the fracture had always been a part of it, but it was never meant to be this. The fracture, the eye, the infinite watching, they had all been tools, mechanisms for something greater, something older. It was the heart of the void. The force that had existed before the first star had ever blinked into being, before the first world had ever formed. It was the force that had shaped the universe. And when it had begun to collapse, when time had started to fray at the edges, the heart had been waiting in the dark, watching, gathering strength. And now it was rising. Ethan could feel it now, could sense the heart stirring at the center of the void. It was the source, the origin of the fracture. It was the heartbeat of all things, life and death, the beginning and the end. The eye had only been a veil, a mask, a tool used to rip apart reality to allow the heart's return. Myra's form flickered again, and when she spoke, the words reverberated in every corner of his mind. "We were never meant to be free, Ethan. We were the key. The fracture was always a part of us." Ethan's consciousness reeled. "What are you saying? We did this?" The truth struck him like a blow to the chest. They hadn't escaped the eye. They hadn't broken free. They had opened the door. They had unwittingly set the stage for the return of the heart, an ancient, cosmic force that had once shaped everything and now sought to reclaim all that had been. They weren't just part of the fracture. They were its harbingers. They were the catalysts for the end of everything. The Watchers had become the bringers of destruction. The void around them began to shift again, but this time, it wasn't just a ripple. It was a violent, ferocious distortion, as though the very fabric of existence was being torn apart by the force of the heart's awakening. The stars, those once constant eyes, began to collapse into themselves, swirling like black holes, devouring everything they touched. The fracture was no longer just a tear. It was a wound that was spreading, unraveling the universe like a thread pulled too tight. "Ethan," Myra's voice faltered, filled with something he couldn't quite place. Fear? Regret? Or was it simply the reality of what they had done setting in? "We can't stop it." But Ethan had to try. There had to be something, some way to undo this, to fight back. Even if he was no longer human, even if he had become part of the fracture, there had to be a way to fight the heart. He could feel the pull, the endless call of the darkness, but somewhere deep inside him, something human still remained. He reached out, though his arms were no longer solid, no longer real in any true sense. He grasped for something, anything, to hold on to, a way to stop the fracture from collapsing further. His mind, what was left of it, screamed in agony as the heart's presence grew more overwhelming. The universe was falling apart, but there was a single thought left in his mind. Maybe, just maybe, there is still a way to break free. But Myra's voice again cut through the rising storm. "It's too late, Ethan. You can't fight the heart." And as she spoke, Ethan felt it, a deep, crushing sense of inevitability. They were no longer the ones in control. They had opened the door to the end, and now they would witness the collapse of everything they had ever known. There would be no escape. They had become the eyes. They had opened the way for the heart of the void, and now they would be its witnesses forever. Ethan could feel it, the last pulse of reality, the final heartbeat of existence, as the stars began to fade, one by one, into nothing. And in that moment, he understood this was not just the end of the universe. This was the end of everything, the end of time, of space, of life itself. The heart had awoken, and it would never stop. The fracture was no longer just a crack in reality. It was the final wound, the gaping mouth of the universe, drawing everything into itself, pulling everything into the heart's grasp. The stars, those once bright and distant eyes, were no longer shining. They had become holes, dark and empty, devouring all light around them. There was no escape from the void. Ethan stood frozen, though he no longer felt his body as he once had. His consciousness was like a thread unraveling in the darkness, stretching thin as the vastness of the void consumed him. Mira stood beside him, her form flickering like a broken image, a shadow caught between worlds. Her face, if it could still be called a face, was a shifting collage of countless expressions, too many to count. She was still there, but she was no longer the person he had once known. She had become something else, something far older. And then, as if the heart itself were watching, the void shuddered. The edges of reality warped and twisted violently. The ground beneath them, the landscape of the fracture, began to fold in on itself, folding like paper, consuming itself in loops of madness. Ethan's breath, if it could still be called breathing, caught in his throat. The universe was collapsing. Time was bending. Every moment of existence was being eaten away, slowly and painfully, until there would be nothing left. The heart was consuming everything. Nothing would remain. And yet, there was no panic. There was no fear. There was only the awareness that this was always meant to happen. We were the key. Myra's voice echoed through his mind, as though the words themselves were made of the void. The heart was always waiting for us. We were never meant to be free. We were created to open this door. Ethan reached out a futile gesture, but something in him still clung to the idea of fighting, to the idea of stopping it all. His hand met hers, or what was left of her form. It flickered like static on a television screen, unstable and fading. "We were free once," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him in any real way anymore. "But we chose to open the fracture." Myra's gaze, those eyes, now endless and hollow, flickered once more, and something shifted in them. Recognition? A flicker of remorse, or something close to it. It was impossible to tell. Her expression twisted, as though battling with the very truth of their existence. "You chose to open it, Ethan," she said softly, the thousand voices mixing in her words. "But you weren't the only one." Ethan's mind raced. He had never meant for any of this. He had never meant to bring the heart back. They had been desperate to escape, but in doing so, they had torn the universe apart. He had opened a door that should never have been opened, and now they would witness its consequences. They were no longer bound by time. They were no longer bound by space. They were nothing but witnesses, trapped in an endless moment where the end of everything stretched on forever. They were the first, the heralds of the end. The stars, what was left of them, began to flicker out one by one. The light of entire galaxies faded, consumed by the ever-growing pull of the heart. The void was expanding, swallowing up everything in its path. The void wasn't just a tear in reality. It was a new beginning, a new cosmic order, an end to all that had been. And Ethan and Mira could do nothing but watch. "What happens now?" he asked, though he knew there was no answer. There was nothing left. They were already lost, already part of the collapse. Myra's expression, if it could be called that, flickered with something like sorrow. "We see it all, Ethan. We witness the end, over and over. We are part of the heart now. There is no going back." The force of the heart was palpable now, a presence pressing in on them from every direction, suffocating their very existence. There was no space, no time, only the feeling of being watched, as if the eye had returned, but it was no longer an observer. It was a force, a will that demanded everything to cease. The fabric of existence stretched thinner and thinner, and Ethan could feel himself slipping into the vastness, losing the last fragments of himself. But then something else stirred, a memory. It was so faint, so distant that it barely registered at first. But it was there, the idea of time, the idea of living. Ethan clung to it, grasping for it like a lifeline in the endless dark. What was it? What was it that he had lost that had brought him here in the first place? The truth was clear, though. It didn't matter. It was already over. They were witnesses to the last moments of existence. They were part of the collapse, and all they could do was see. See the end of everything, the end of the stars, the end of the void, the end of the heart. And as the darkness closed in around them, something new began to form. A single star blinked somewhere in the distance, a solitary point of light, fragile and small. And in that single blink, everything that had been the universe, the heart, the fracture, collapsed in on itself one final time. The end. And then, nothing. The last star blinked out. The final thread of reality snapped. There was no sound, no tremor, no flicker of light. The vast, infinite darkness stretched endlessly, its cold embrace swallowing what remained of existence. Time, what was left of it, ceased to flow. There was no past, no future, only the eternal now, where nothing had meaning and all that had been was forgotten. Ethan could feel it, the weight of everything pressing down on him, if he still existed at all. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know what he was. The universe had folded in on itself, crumbling like dust in the wind. The heart had consumed everything, and now there was only silence. And yet, in the silence, something stirred. At first, it was just a flicker, a faint tremor beneath the surface of the void, like the pulse of a heartbeat that should not be. Ethan's fractured consciousness, though fading, registered it. Something beyond the void, beyond the nothingness. A shifting, a slight ripple that bent the stillness. A glimmer of life. He reached for it, grasping in the dark. There was nothing left to hold on to, but somehow, he reached. A spark, a memory, or was it a dream? It was fleeting, like the ghost of a thought that refused to die. He couldn't tell what it was, only that it was something. Something more than the nothing he had been trapped in. Then another pulse, fainter this time, but stronger. Mira was there, or rather, part of her. Mira, Ethan's voice, if it could be called a voice, drifted in the dark. But he felt no answer. She was lost to the collapse. As he was, they were both consumed, pieces of a shattered reality. And yet, this felt different. It felt like something was waiting to be reborn. The fracture wasn't the end. It couldn't be. A jagged, splintered thought crept into his mind. The heart, had it truly consumed everything? Or had it only changed it? Ethan felt it then, a shudder deep within the fabric of the void. It wasn't the universe ending, it was something starting. The quiet hum of the heart had subsided, its crushing force withdrawn, but something had been left behind. A seed of possibility, a point of light in the deepest darkness. Could it be that even in the collapse, there was something, some fragment, left? Ethan's fragmented awareness shifted, pulled, drawn to this new force. It wasn't the heart, but something else. Something older, ancient, primal. The silence began to tremble again, and this time, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first spark appeared, a point of light, faint but undeniable. It flickered once, then twice, and then a cascade of sparks followed, lighting up the infinite dark, like stars reborn from the ashes of their own demise. Ethan could feel the pulse of it deep in the void. It was a heartbeat, a thrum that was not the end of everything, but the beginning of something new. He reached out again, the fragments of his mind screaming for answers. What was this? What was happening? Had the heart truly been defeated, or was it simply waiting? And then another figure appeared in the dark. It wasn't Mira, not exactly, but it was her, or what had once been her. Her form flickered at the edges of the void, a shimmering ghost, as if part of her essence had survived the collapse. She was like him now, like a shadow of a dream, barely a flicker of life. But she was there. Mira, Ethan whispered again, the word drifting through the emptiness. This time, there was a response. Her voice, distant and soft, like the sound of a memory long lost, echoed back. We were never meant to be the end. Ethan didn't understand. His consciousness, still splintered, grasped at the words but couldn't hold them. What did she mean? The fracture wasn't the end, Ethan, Mira continued. It was a test, a trial. The heart, the void, it was all part of the cycle. The end has never come. Ethan's mind spun. A cycle? What did she mean? How could this be? They had opened the fracture. They had let the heart consume everything. What was left? Myra's voice softened, more clear now. This darkness is not death. It is only the silence before something new. The beginning. There was a point, a spark, a seed that survived. And now, the darkness around them began to shift. A faint light appeared, barely visible at first, but growing with every passing moment. Ethan could feel it now, the warmth of it, like the first rays of dawn after an eternity of night. It was life. It was hope. The stars were returning, but they were no longer the same. They were something different, reborn from the very ashes of the heart's devastation. This was not a universe being rebuilt, but a new cosmic order. The universe had not ended. It had only shifted, changed, begun again. Ethan's mind swirled, overwhelmed by the weight of what he was feeling, what he was witnessing. He had opened the fracture. He had helped bring the heart to the edge of the universe. But now it seemed like there was more. More than just collapse. More than just destruction. This is the true heart of the universe. Myra's voice whispered through the void. Not the heart that consumed, but the one that will create. We were always meant to witness it. We are the eyes of this rebirth, Ethan. The void flickered, a cascade of light tearing through the darkness. The stars returned, brighter and more alive than ever before. The endless night had been pierced. The first heartbeat of the new universe rang out. It wasn't the end. It was the beginning. Ethan, Mira, together, but separate, trapped yet freed, stood in awe of the new reality unfolding. They had witnessed the end, but now they would witness the beginning. The universe was reborn. The fracture was no longer a wound. It was a bridge, a passage from death to life. And they had a role to play in it, not as harbingers of destruction, but as the witnesses to the endless possibilities that stretched before them. For the first time in what felt like eternity, Ethan felt something that was more than just awareness. It was hope, a spark, a future, and somewhere deep within, he knew it was only the beginning. The void had become light, and with it came the sense of something new, a fresh beginning, not born of chaos, but from something else, something older, something that existed before. Time itself had ever been given shape. It pulsed like a beating heart, a rhythm that swelled and then released, flowing outward like the first breath of creation. Ethan stood, though, in a sense, he still wasn't sure if he truly stood. He was not quite flesh and bone anymore, not entirely human, and yet something about this new form felt whole. His mind was no longer fractured. It was somehow more unified, more present. He could feel the echoes of his past existence, but they no longer held him. They were like a distant dream, fading the more the new universe unfolded before him. Beside him, Mira flickered, her form more solid now than it had been during the collapse, but still not fully real. Her face held an expression of awe, as if she, too, was still trying to grasp the enormity of what had just occurred. The stars, those once distant, impersonal watchers, were now vibrant points of light, scattered across a vast, uncharted sky. They were no longer cold and indifferent. They were alive, aware. And beneath them, new worlds were taking shape, planets, stars, galaxies, forming from the fragments of the old, woven together by the same pulse of creation that had sparked the rebirth. Myra's voice, soft but unmistakable, broke the silence. "This isn't what I expected," she said, her tone a strange mix of wonder and uncertainty. We thought we were the cause of it all, the collapse, the destruction. But it wasn't destruction. It was transformation. Ethan turned his gaze to her, his mind processing her words slowly. "We were the cause, Mira. We opened the fracture. We brought the heart into the universe." "No," she replied, shaking her head gently. "That was only a part of it. The heart was never meant to be the end. It was only a catalyst, a force to bring about change. Her eyes seemed to shimmer, reflecting the growing light of the stars around them. We didn't destroy the universe, Ethan. We broke it open so that it could be born again. For the first time since the collapse, a flicker of clarity washed over Ethan. The burden that had weighed on him, the guilt of unleashing the heart, the guilt of tearing apart the fabric of existence began to lift. The collapse hadn't been the end. It had been a moment of birth, a necessary transformation. But that didn't mean the scars were gone. Ethan glanced around, trying to take in the full scope of a new universe. The stars, alive and vibrant, now surrounded them like a canvas of possibilities. Worlds were forming in the distance, planets swirling into shape, nebulae blooming into color. The void, once endless and suffocating, was now a place of potential, a space for creation, for life, for all the things that had never existed before. It was beautiful, yet something about the vastness unsettled him. They were no longer the watchers of the collapse, no longer the witnesses to the end. But now, as the universe began its rebirth, Ethan and Mira stood at its edges, uncertain of their place within it. They were not gods, not creators. They were something in between, survivors. And there were questions that hung in the air like the first stars in the sky. What would happen now? Would they forever be tied to the fracture, to the heart that had set the universe in motion? Or had their actions created something more? "We're not the same anymore, Mira," Ethan said, the words tasting strange as they left his mind. "We were meant to open the fracture, to release the heart, but now..." His voice faltered. "Now, I don't know what we're meant to do." Myra's form flickered, and for a moment, her expression softened. She reached out, her hand brushing against his, though it felt like a dream, an echo of touch. "Maybe that's the point," she whispered. "Maybe we were always meant to be transitions. The ones who witnessed the end and the beginning. We've never been the ones to create Ethan, but maybe we can learn to live in this new universe. Maybe we were meant to see it and pass it on." Ethan nodded, though uncertainty still clung to him. What would life be like now? How would they adapt to this new reality? Could they ever find a way to move past what they had been, past the fractured existence they had once known? As the stars above them began to shine brighter, Ethan realized the truth in Myra's words. This was not the end. Not for them. Not for the universe. It was a new beginning, a chance to learn, to grow, to reshape everything. The collapse had brought them here. The heart had awakened. The fracture had torn open the fabric of the cosmos. And now they stood on the precipice of something new. A universe that was both unfamiliar and full of potential. The universe wasn't broken. It was just waiting for them to learn how to live in it. "Do you think we'll find a place here?" Ethan asked, his voice quiet. Mira didn't answer immediately, but the faintest trace of a smile appeared on her face. A flicker of something human, something alive. "I don't know, Ethan," she said, "but I think we'll find it together." And as they stood there, in the heart of the rebirth, the stars continued to shine, bright, alive, hopeful. The endless possibilities stretched before them, unmarked by the past, unburdened by the collapse. They were no longer harbingers of the end. They were the witnesses to the beginning of something new. Days, or perhaps moments passed. Time, still in flux, stretched and contracted around them, like a thread pulled taut and then loosened. Ethan and Mira drifted through the vastness of the reborn universe. Their feet were their presence, for they were still no longer fully of flesh, finding little direction. They were lost in the infinite possibilities, the vastness of this new world that had begun to take shape. New stars, new worlds, new forces. It was all so much to comprehend, to understand. The stars were alive now, alive in ways they never had been before. They were conscious, aware of their own existence, pulsing with energy, their light no longer static but vibrant. The galaxies spun, swirling like dancers in a grand cosmic ballet. And yet, despite the beauty of this new creation, Ethan could sense something more, something other. The heart had passed. The fracture was closed, but there were still echoes, deep reverberations of what had once been, ripples left behind by the force that had nearly undone everything. Even in this new universe, Ethan felt it, and so did Mira. They had journeyed far, drifting through the birth of stars and planets, but their path seemed to draw them toward a distant, silent place. A shadow in the midst of all this light. A place where the fabric of the new cosmos seemed tighter, where the energy felt unnatural. "What is it?" Mira asked, her voice barely a whisper in the vastness. "That place." Ethan's gaze fixed on the horizon, where the darkness stretched like a wound, an open tear in the fabric of a new universe. The stars around them, though brilliant and beautiful, began to dim as they neared it. The energy in the air seemed to shift. It was a place that shouldn't exist, a place of residue, a trace of the old cosmos that had somehow survived the collapse. The further they traveled, the more the light around them bent and twisted. The new worlds, the new stars, were now distant memories behind them. They stood at the edge of something that even the rebirth had not yet touched. "Why do we feel it, Mira?" Ethan asked, his voice heavy with uncertainty. "Why does it feel like we're being pulled toward it?" Myra's form flickered again. Her eyes, the stars that filled them, shifted, momentarily clouded with doubt. "I don't know," she said softly, "but I feel it too. It's like we're drawn to it, like we have to understand what's left behind. But that doesn't make sense, does it? The universe is reborn. There's no place for the old." Ethan didn't know what to say. They had no answers, only the pull. They reached the place, and the shift in reality became undeniable. It wasn't a world. It wasn't even a star. It was a tear. The dark rift before them wasn't just a shadow. It was something alive, but hollow. A scar in the fabric of space. Still bleeding remnants of the old universe. A place that had never been meant to survive. And then, from the rift, a figure emerged. Ethan and Mira froze. The being, though it appeared to be made of light and shadow, seemed to defy the very nature of the reborn universe. It was neither new nor old, neither alive nor dead. It was something in between. Its form was shifting constantly, as if it could never settle, always slipping between realities. It approached them, its presence filling the air with a strange, heavy energy. It was no voice that spoke, but a feeling that pressed against their minds. "You have come." The voice was not one, but many, thousands of whispers layered over each other. It was the feeling of being surrounded by 1,000 eyes, watching, waiting. It was a presence not bound by time or space, a being that had lived through everything. Ethan stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" The being did not respond in the way he expected. Instead, it reached out to him, its tendrils of shadow and light stretching across the vast expanse, touching the very core of his being. And then he saw it memories. His memories, Myra's memories, the collapse, the fracture, the heart, the destruction. The being knew them. And then, in a rush, Ethan saw beyond their own histories. He saw the universe before the collapse, saw the heart not as a destroyer, but as an awakener, a necessary force that had once nurtured the cosmic cycles. He saw the fracture not as a wound, but as a transition, a passage between two forms of existence. The being was older than the collapse. It was part of the heart of the universe, born from its eternal cycles. It was a guardian of something far beyond what Ethan or Mira could comprehend. And as the being's presence filled his mind, he understood. The heart had not been a mistake. The fracture had not been a failure. They had been part of a much larger process. The rebirth was not just the beginning of a new universe. It was the end of a cycle that would begin again. The universe was not a constant, but a revolving wheel, a cycle of life and death that never truly ended. The fracture had opened the door for the universe to be remade, to shed its skin and take on new forms. But in doing so, something was always left behind. We are the guardians, The being's voice whispered again, its presence pushing deeper into their minds. We protect the transition. We watch the old fall away and the new be born. But there are always remnants. Ethan and Mira looked at each other. They were both trembling, but neither spoke. The weight of the being's words was too much to process. What does this mean for us? Mira finally asked, her voice fragile. Are we part of this cycle? Will we? She trailed off, unsure how to finish the thought. The being's form twisted. You are witnesses. You are echoes of what came before. But you are also part of what is to come. You carry the knowledge of the old universe, the seeds of the new. You will walk between worlds, remembering the past, shaping the future. Ethan's mind raced. Was that their role then? Not to be saviors or destroyers, but carriers. They were not just part of the rebirth. They were part of the memory. The universe would always be new, but the remnants of the old would remain, shaping everything that followed. The being's gaze, if it could be called that, turned toward the stars now brightening once more around them. You have witnessed the end, but the end is never truly the end. It is only the beginning again. And with that, the being faded into the dark rift, its presence lingering like a whispered secret. Ethan and Mira were alone again, the universe stretching infinitely before them. And yet, in the silence that followed, something new began to take shape in their hearts. The weight of their journey had not been about destruction. It had been about change. They were the witnesses and the carriers of the cycle. And as the stars burned bright once again, Ethan felt a strange sense of peace. He understood, finally, that the universe would continue to turn. The heart would return when needed, the fracture would open again when time called for it. And he and Mira, they would be here to witness it all. They would live with the memory of the past. And in doing so, they would shape the future. The cycle was not theirs to control, but they were part of it. And that was enough. The stars had settled once more into their familiar constellations, their vibrant light dancing through the cosmos. The new universe had fully emerged from the collapse, no longer a swirling maelstrom of chaos, but a vast, ever-expanding expanse of possibility. Yet, despite the beauty of it all, Ethan and Mira could not shake the weight of the being's words, nor the burden that had been placed upon them. They stood together, gazing at the remnants of the old universe, a faint ripple in the fabric of the new cosmos. The darkness at the edge of existence, where the rift had been, had closed, but the echoes lingered. They could still feel it, like a pulse beneath the skin of the universe, something alive but hidden. How do we even begin to understand this? Myra's voice was a whisper, her form flickering in and out of full clarity. The new universe pulsed around them, full of light and life, but it felt like they were still outside of it all, distant from the rest of creation, a bridge between worlds that were no longer theirs to inhabit. Ethan stood silent for a moment, feeling the weight of her question. How did they begin? They had walked through the collapse, witnessed the breaking of everything they knew, and emerged on the other side as something different. They were guardians now, tasked with carrying the remnants of the past into the future. But what did that truly mean? The being called us echoes, he said softly, his voice steady but uncertain. We're not meant to create, Mira. We're not gods, but we carry something within us, a memory. Mira nodded, though her eyes held a distant look as she gazed into the vast unknown. A memory of what? She asked, the question more for herself than for him. A memory of the universe we destroyed, or of something deeper? I think. Ethan paused, his words coming slower now as understanding began to form. I think it's a memory of the cycle. The universe doesn't end, Mira. It just changes, over and over. And we are the ones who carry the knowledge of that change. Are we supposed to pass it on? Myra's voice was thick with the weight of her thoughts. To those who come after us? To the new stars? The new worlds? Ethan felt a strange certainty that settled deep in his chest. Maybe. I don't know. But I think it's not just about passing on knowledge. It's about witnessing. We bear witness to the past, to the cycles, to the heart of creation. And in doing so, We help shape the future, even if we don't understand it completely. Mira turned to him, her eyes searching his face for something, answers, reassurance, perhaps even an understanding they both lacked. So, what now? Ethan looked out across the cosmos, feeling the pull of the universe. There was something in the distance, a world forming in the quiet expanse of space. It was small, a new star just beginning to take shape, its warmth still flickering like a candle in the dark. We start by going there, he said, pointing toward the developing world. We start by watching. We begin as the observers we're meant to be. Without another word, they moved toward the forming star, their steps light but purposeful. As they traveled through the cosmos, the stars seemed to welcome them, their light brighter as if recognizing their presence. They were no longer just travelers in the universe. They were part of it. They were seeds planted within it, connected to its cycles, and bound to its endless changes. The world they approached grew larger as they drew closer. It was a barren planet, no oceans or forests, no signs of life yet, but there was potential. The star above it pulsed with energy, sending waves of light over the rocky surface. Ethan and Mira hovered above it, watching the birth of a new world unfold before them. This is what we're meant to witness, isn't it? Mira said quietly, her voice reverberating in the stillness. The birth of life, the beginning of another cycle. Ethan nodded. We're part of it all. We carry the past, but we also carry the future. Every life, every world, every star is part of the cycle, and our role is to witness and remember. For a long time, they watched as the planet's surface began to shift and change, the first signs of life stirring beneath the barren crust. Energy crackled in the atmosphere, and slowly, new forms began to emerge, simple organisms, life finding its footing once more. We're seeing the beginning, Ethan said, his voice filled with quiet awe. The first breath of a new world. Myra's form flickered slightly, a smile tugging at the edges of her expression. I never thought I'd see this again. It feels like we're part of something bigger, like we were meant to be here. Ethan looked at her, a deep sense of connection passing between them. Despite the unknown, despite the burden of being the carriers of the cycle, there was comfort in the idea that they were not alone. They had each other, and together, they would continue to walk through the shifting tides of the universe. As the planet slowly blossomed with life, they knew their role was just beginning. They would witness more births, more deaths, more cycles of change. Each moment would be different yet, always the same, a repeating rhythm that echoed through the cosmos, a song sung by the stars. And they, as the guardians of the memory, would keep that song alive. They would carry it, pass it on, and protect it. For as long as the cycle continued, they would stand at its edge, remembering, witnessing, and perhaps, just perhaps, shaping what was to come. The stars, now burning brighter than ever, watched them, as they always had and always would. The universe stretched out before Ethan and Mira like an endless sea, filled with swirling galaxies, emerging stars, and the faintest glimmers of new life. Their journey continued as they moved between worlds, witnesses to the slow, deliberate birth of creation itself. The echoes of the old universe had faded somewhat, their presence a distant memory, but the pulse of the new cosmos, this fragile, beautiful beginning, was a constant hum in their minds. But the deeper they ventured into the unknown, the more they began to feel a stirring, like a shift in the very foundation of reality. A current beneath the surface, a dissonant chord in the symphony of creation. The feeling was subtle at first, like a distant whisper carried on a wind that didn't exist, but it was there, undeniable. One day, they found themselves drifting toward the edge of a new galaxy, one where the stars were particularly bright, their light almost blinding in its intensity. The galaxy was young, teeming with the energy of new births, but something felt wrong. A disturbance, though unseen, rippled through the cosmic fabric. This place, Mira began, her voice trailing off as she hovered beside Ethan. It doesn't feel like the others. There's something off about it. Ethan's gaze was fixed on the galaxy ahead. His senses, tuned to the very rhythm of the universe, had begun to prick at him in warning. Something in the cosmic currents had shifted, and this galaxy, so full of potential, was now fraught with a strange tension. There was no obvious sign of destruction, no immediate peril, but he knew, instinctively, that something was wrong. "It's like there's a darkness here, hiding beneath all the light," he said, his words heavy with uncertainty. "Something trying to pull the energy away from the stars or twist it in some way." They moved closer, the galaxy's vibrant stars now a swirling dance of light and shadow. As they neared, a low hum filled the air, a sound not of creation, but of distortion. It was faint at first, like a whisper of a long-forgotten memory, but soon it grew louder, a slow, pulsating beat that seemed to emanate from the very core of the galaxy. "This is not natural," Mira said, her form flickering in the air, a nervous tension rippling through her. "I can feel it. There's a presence here, something old. Something." She hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "Something that doesn't belong." Ethan nodded, his heart quickening. He knew what she meant. This wasn't the gentle cycle of birth and rebirth they had witnessed before. This was different, a disruption. Suddenly, the stars began to flicker erratically, their light dimming and pulsing in an irregular pattern. The galaxy, once full of life, was now beginning to wither, the light flickering like a flame struggling to stay lit. The energy that had once flowed freely now felt like it was being pulled towards something, a dark, unseen force at the heart of the galaxy. It was like the very fabric of creation was unraveling in slow motion. Ethan and Mira exchanged a glance, both of them realizing the same thing at the same moment. "We have to go to the center," Ethan said, his voice firm. "We need to find out what's causing this." Mira nodded without hesitation. Together, they moved deeper into the galaxy, following the strange pulse that seemed to guide them. The stars around them flickered like dying embers, their light growing weaker as they neared the source of the disturbance. And then they saw it. At the very heart of the galaxy, where the brightest stars once burned, there was a vast black hole, a swirling mass of dark energy that seemed to consume everything in its path. It was not a natural black hole, however. Its edges were jagged, as if torn, and the energy it emitted was not the expected pull of gravity, but a twisted force, something malevolent, hungry. "What is that?" Mira whispered, her voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as he surveyed the horrific sight before them. "That isn't just a black hole," he said. "It's a tear, a wound in the fabric of this universe. And whatever is inside it, it's feeding on the energy of the stars, draining them, twisting the life around it." As they approached, the energy grew stronger, the pulse almost deafening in its intensity. Ethan could feel it pressing against his chest, trying to force him into submission. Myra's form flickered violently beside him, her expression one of sheer determination as she tried to resist the pull of the black hole. "There's something alive in there," Ethan said, his voice grim. "Something that doesn't belong." A voice, low, guttural, like a whisper from the depths of an abyss, echoed through their minds. "You should not have come." The voice was not just one being. It was many, a chorus of hundreds, thousands, all of them speaking at once. The tone was unsettling, distorted, and broken, as if the very fabric of space was being torn apart with each word. Mira stepped forward, her face resolute. "What is this place?" she demanded, her voice stronger than before. "What are you?" The voice responded, its words slithering through the space between them like dark smoke. "We are the remnants, the ones left behind, the ones who were cast out when the heart began its cycle." Ethan felt a chill crawl down his spine. The remnants. These were the entities that had once existed in the old universe, but had been discarded, cast aside when the heart had torn through existence and remade it. They had survived, hidden in the folds of space, and now they were feeding on the universe's energy, twisting it to their will. "We are the ones who belong to the old cycles," the voice continued, "and we shall reclaim what is ours. The new universe is not yours to shape. It is ours to twist." A surge of power pulsed from the black hole, a shockwave that sent Ethan and Mira flying backward. Their forms flickered and rippled as they struggled to regain control, the force of the energy threatening to tear them apart. "What do we do?" Mira shouted, her voice barely audible over the roar of the energy. "We stop it," Ethan said, his voice determined. "We can't let them destroy this universe. This cycle must continue." Together, they gathered their strength, pushing back against the malevolent force. The remnants, though powerful, were fractured, still broken from the collapse of the old universe. Their presence was a distortion, a lingering scar in the fabric of the cosmos, but that scar could be healed. Ethan reached out, his hand trembling as he connected with the energy around him. The stars, the very essence of life and creation, called to him. They were alive. They could fight back. And so, Ethan and Mira did the only thing they could. They resisted. They became part of the cycle once again, pulling from the very energy that was being twisted by the remnants. The stars fought back with them, their light pushing back against the darkness that sought to consume them. For a moment, it seemed as if the remnants would win. The black hole's force grew stronger, and the galaxy flickered on the verge of collapse. But then, a final surge of light broke through the darkness. The cycle of creation, of life and death, was not theirs to claim. The universe belonged to the living, and the cycle would not be stopped. The remnants screamed as their form began to disintegrate, their power dissipating into the vastness of space. The black hole, once a gaping wound, began to close, the energy that had been feeding it now dissipating into the stars themselves. As the darkness began to fade, Ethan and Mira stood together, breathing heavily. The galaxy around them began to heal, the stars shining bright once more, their light steady and unwavering. But as the remnants dissolved into the ether, one final whisper echoed in the distance, fading like a forgotten memory. "We will return." The aftermath of the battle with the remnants was strangely quiet. The black hole had collapsed in on itself, its jagged edges closing like the final stitch in a wound, and the galaxy around them slowly began to breathe again. The stars that had flickered and dimmed in fear were now burning brighter, their light steady and unyielding. The dark pulse that had plagued the galaxy had receded, but the scars of that battle remained etched in the fabric of space. The echoes of the remnants' whispers still reverberated in the corners of their minds, a warning that would not easily fade. Ethan and Mira stood together, hovering in the vast emptiness, gazing at the reborn galaxy. Though the immediate threat had passed, they both knew that the universe, now newly forged, was still fragile. They were guardians, but even the greatest guardians could not stand alone against the unknown. "What now?" Mira asked, her voice soft yet filled with a quiet urgency. Her form shimmered against the backdrop of stars, as if she were both part of the universe and separate from it, caught in that in-between space that had once defined them as mortals. But now it felt like they had transcended something, changed. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the pulse of the universe around him. "Now, we heal," he said, his voice steady but thoughtful. "This cycle is still young. The remnants were just the first warning. The universe is full of unknowns, and there will be more forces like them, things that will seek to disrupt the balance. But we are here, and we will watch, protect, and guide." Mira looked at him, her eyes flickering with something like both concern and understanding. "But what if? What if we can't protect it all? What if the cycle breaks again?" Ethan's expression softened. He had thought about the same thing many times since the battle, since their strange encounter with the remnants. Could they truly be the protectors of a universe so vast and full of mysteries? Could they stand against all the forces that might rise to challenge the cycle? "We can't protect everything," he said finally, the weight of truth heavy in his chest. "But we can witness. We can keep the memory of what was and what is what should be. Our purpose isn't just to fight the darkness. It's to remind the universe that light can always return, even in the darkest places. A silence fell between them, both of them contemplating the depth of his words. For a long moment, they simply floated among the stars, allowing the quiet of the cosmos to wash over them. The universe stretched infinitely in every direction, and within its vastness, they were but two fleeting presences, echoes of what had come before and what might come next. Do you think they'll return? Mira asked quietly, breaking the silence. The remnants. You said they would. Ethan nodded slowly, his gaze distant. I do. Their hunger wasn't just for power, it was for something deeper. They were born of the old universe, and no matter how much the new one grows, their presence will always linger. A fracture like that, it doesn't heal easily, but they will not be the only threat. There are other forces out there, forces older than even the remnants. They've been waiting in the shadows, just as the remnants did. The tension in the air was palpable. They both knew it wasn't over. This universe, though beautiful in its newness, was still fragile, still vulnerable. What happens then? Mira asked. What do we do when we face something even worse than the remnants? Ethan turned to her, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something behind his eyes, a spark of understanding that had been growing stronger with each passing moment. We don't face it alone, he said. We face it together, and we don't face it blindly. We learn, we watch, we adapt. We are guardians, but we are also students of the universe, learning from every cycle, every star. And as long as we keep remembering, the light will never truly fade. Mira considered his words, then nodded, a quiet sense of determination settling into her being. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were not alone in their task. They would stand together, as they always had, and face whatever challenges the universe sent their way. No matter how dark, no matter how strange, they would endure. As they hovered in the heart of the galaxy, the stars pulsing around them like the beating heart of the cosmos, they felt something new stir within them, a connection, not just to each other, but to everything that surrounded them. They were part of the universe now, just as the universe was a part of them. Every star, every planet, every flicker of light was a thread in the intricate web that bound them all together. They were not just guardians. They were witnesses, keepers of the light. And as they continued their journey, they knew one thing for certain. The universe was fragile, but it was not broken. And as long as they remained steadfast, they would continue to bear witness to its beauty and protect it when the darkness came again. Ethan and Mira traveled across the stars, their forms as constant as the pulse of the universe itself, yet their minds never still. Every galaxy they visited, every world they watched over, was a reminder of their purpose: to protect, to witness, to guide. But even as they observed the birth of stars and the creation of new life, their thoughts remained unsettled. The remnants had been only one challenge, but the universe was vast, and Ethan's warnings of darker forces continued to echo in Myra's mind. Every quiet star system seemed to be hiding something, a shift in the cosmic winds, a hum beneath the surface of reality itself. They had arrived at the edge of a region of space unknown to them. It wasn't just a barren wasteland or an uncharted galaxy. It was something more. The stars here were dimmer, their light weak, flickering in and out like candles caught in a tempest. The galaxies themselves appeared stretched, like faint impressions on the fabric of the cosmos, almost as if they had been smeared away by something. Unnatural. There's something wrong with this place, Mira said, her voice cutting through the silence. She hovered closer to Ethan, her form barely flickering in the cold, hollow space around them. Ethan's gaze swept over the expanse before them. The stars here were not like the ones they had witnessed in the galaxies that flourished with life and light. There was no warmth, no energy, only an eerie stillness that felt like it was holding its breath. He didn't need to say anything. Mira had already felt it too. This wasn't just emptiness. This was a presence, a void that seemed to reject the natural order of the universe. "I've never felt anything like this," Ethan said, his voice laced with unease. "It's as though something is trying to erase it." The region they had entered was no ordinary place. It wasn't just dark space or the leftovers of a dead galaxy. There was something here that shouldn't be. It felt as if they were no longer in the universe they had known, but at the edges of something else, something older than even the remnants. "There's a distortion in the fabric of reality," Mira murmured, her eyes narrowing as she examined the stretch of space before them. "But it's not like the remnants. This is different." Ethan nodded, sensing the same thing. The remnants had been powerful, yes, but they were still part of the old universe, the one that had collapsed to make way for the new cycle. This felt ancient, like a forgotten scar on the fabric of existence, something that had never been part of the creation, but still bled through to the present. They moved forward cautiously, toward a swirling mass of dark energy that stood at the center of this desolate expanse. It was not a black hole or any familiar cosmic phenomenon. This was something far stranger, an ominous void that seemed to devour not just light, but time itself. The closer they got, the more distorted the space around them became. Gravity wavered, time stretched and contracted in strange, disorienting rhythms. Suddenly, a voice echoed in their minds. It was not a whisper this time. It was a presence, overwhelming and cold, that seemed to seep into their very consciousness, filling every crevice with a sense of cold dread. "You should not have come." The voice was not a single entity, but many, a chorus of disembodied echoes speaking at once. Their words were fragmented, as if from the deepest reaches of some forgotten memory. "We have waited, patient and hungry. The stars above will fall. The cycle will end. This is the beginning of the end." Mira and Ethan recoiled, but not from fear alone. The voice felt like an invasive force, something that didn't just speak but broke through their minds, threatening to tear at the seams of their thoughts. It wasn't just words, it was presence. The feeling that something was watching, something ancient and far beyond the cycles of life and death, beyond the heart that had created their universe. "You are the guardians of the stars," the voice continued, more mocking now. "But these stars are not yours to guard. You are not the first, nor will you be the last. We have seen you before, and we will see you again. We are the true architects, and your time will soon be over." Mira staggered back, her form flickering, as though the weight of the voice had physically pushed against her. Ethan's thoughts raced. What was this? What was speaking to them now? "You're not from this universe," Ethan said aloud, the realization sinking in like a cold wave. "You're not a part of this cycle." The voice laughed low, guttural, and bone-chilling. "We were here before the heart, before your cycle began. We were the builders, the ones who shaped the first stars. But we were abandoned, left to decay in the space between worlds." Suddenly, a vision flashed before their eyes. A massive, ancient being, its form unlike anything they had seen before. It was neither solid nor gaseous, but something between, existing as a shadow in a reality that was still being formed. It stretched across the edges of space, bending it, shaping it with invisible hands. It was a creator, but a creator of something twisted, something beyond the laws of the universe. "We shall return," the voice whispered, the final words dragging out like a dying breath. "We shall reclaim what was ours, and this universe will fall. There is no salvation for you." The image of the shadowed being vanished, and the cold, empty space returned. The voice faded, but its words lingered like an oppressive weight in their minds. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt suffocating, as if the very air around them had been drained. "We just crossed into something, much older than the remnants," Mira said quietly, her voice barely audible. "Something that has been here long before the first star was born." Ethan nodded grimly, his eyes scanning the void before them. "It's like a remnant of the old universe, a part of it that never died, a scar that still bleeds. But it's more than that. It's waiting, waiting for something. He looked over at Mira, his expression hardened with determination. We need to understand what this is, because if this entity, whatever it is, returns, the universe itself may not survive. Mira nodded, the fire of resolve igniting in her eyes. We can't let that happen, but we don't even know where to begin. Ethan's gaze never wavered from the swirling void. We start by learning, we gather what knowledge we can, and we keep moving forward. The universe must survive. The stars around them, dim though they were, seemed to glow a little brighter, as if in silent agreement. The universe had survived the remnants, but this new threat, this ancient shadow, would test them in ways they could never have predicted. As they moved deeper into the unknown, the path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain. The darkness they had just encountered was no ordinary threat. It was an ancient force that had been watching, waiting, and now it was awakening. And Ethan and Mira would not stand idly by. The void around them felt endless, pressing in like a weight on their souls. The stars they had once felt connected to, anchors of light in an ever-expanding universe, seemed far, far away now. Here, on the edge of existence, the cold, oppressive silence smothered everything. The universe had always been full of life, of energy, of stories waiting to unfold. But this place felt like a graveyard. Mira and Ethan moved together, their forms shimmering in the dark, surrounded by the sickly, fading glow of the dim stars. Every step they took seemed to push them further from what they knew and into the heart of something that had been left to decay. "I don't understand," Mira whispered, the weight of their task pressing on her. "How is this even possible? How can something live like this? Outside of time?" Ethan's brow furrowed as he floated beside her. He had been thinking the same thing ever since the voice had spoken to them. How could something so ancient, so far beyond the cycle of the universe, still exist in the empty spaces between the stars? What had happened to it, and why had it remained hidden for so long? He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the pull of gravity growing weaker as they neared the center of this strange, uncharted region. This being, it's like a shadow of a time before time. It's beyond our understanding of reality. Whatever it is, it's not bound by the same laws that govern the rest of the universe. Mira turned to look at him, her face a mixture of confusion and determination. But why would it be here now? Why didn't we encounter it before? Ethan hesitated. Maybe it's been waiting for the right moment. The cycle was created as a form of balance, but not everything in this universe was meant to thrive within it. Some forces, like this one, are remnants of an older existence, and it's been watching, waiting for us to find it. They paused at the threshold of the swirling void, where the cosmic energy twisted in unnatural shapes. The center seemed to pulse, almost like a living thing, its dark tendrils reaching outward as though it had a mind of its own. "There's a pattern," Mira said, staring into the depths. "I think I can feel it, Ethan. A heartbeat, not like a star's pulse. It's cold, hollow." Ethan turned to face her, his gaze sharp. "You can feel it?" "More like hear it," Mira said, her voice low, almost reverent. "A beat, faint but steady. A rhythm, like it's calling us." Her words sent a chill through Ethan, and instinctively, he reached for her hand. This wasn't just an energy field they were dealing with anymore. It was alive, aware. Whatever was at the center of this dark place wasn't just an entity. It was a force that had its own intentions. And those intentions, they feared, could be catastrophic. The beat grew stronger, louder in Myra's ears, and suddenly, they were pulled forward, not by gravity, but by an overwhelming force that seemed to come from within the dark heart of the void. Before they could react, they were surrounded by swirling shadows, tendrils of dark energy wrapping around them like chains, binding them in place. The world around them stretched and distorted, as if the very laws of space and time were collapsing under the weight of something greater than either of them. "Ethan," Myra's voice trembled, but she wasn't sure if it was from fear or the sheer pressure of whatever they were facing. "What is this? What's happening?" I don't know, Ethan said through gritted teeth. The energy constricted around them, pulling at their consciousness. Stay strong, Mira. We need to understand it. Focus on the heartbeat. It's the only thing that feels like it's real in this place. They closed their eyes, letting their minds reach out to the pulsing rhythm. It wasn't just sound, it was a presence. They could feel it beneath the surface of everything, an ancient energy that had been woven into the very fabric of reality before the universe was reborn. And now it was waking up. Suddenly, the shadows parted, and before them stood a shape. Not a form as they had ever known it. No humanoid, no creature with substance, but something entirely different. It was vast, a shifting mass of shadows and dark matter, and it seemed to look at them. The heartbeat quickened. You are here. The voice came again, the same one that had spoken to them before. But now it was no longer just a voice in their minds. It filled the entire space, echoing in their bones, vibrating through their very beings. You are the guardians, the protectors of stars. You think you understand the universe, but you do not. You do not even understand yourselves. The presence loomed before them, its shape unfurling like a great wound in the fabric of reality, stretching and twisting in impossible ways. It was neither malevolent nor benign, but something older, something that defied comprehension. I know who you are, Ethan said, his voice steady despite the overwhelming presence. And I know what you want, but we won't let you take what's not yours. Take! The entity laughed, a low, rumbling sound that shook the very stars. You do not understand. I do not take. I reclaim. I am the first, the architects of existence. And you, it paused, and for a moment, a dark energy coiled like a serpent around Ethan and Mira. You are nothing but children playing with the fragments of a universe you did not create. Myra's eyes narrowed. She wasn't sure what the entity meant by architects, but she could feel its words getting under her skin. The universe may have been built before, but it's different now. It's a new cycle, and we are its guardians. We won't let it fall to the likes of you. The entity's laughter died down, replaced by a chilling calmness. You cannot stop what is inevitable. The cycle will break. The stars will fade. And when they do, there will be nothing left to guard. The true architects of this universe will rise, and the light you hold so dear will be lost in the shadows. Before they could respond, the entity's form began to dissolve, disintegrating into the empty void. But it was not gone. No, its presence lingered, like a shadow that would not lift. We will be watching, and when you have nothing left to protect, when the last star dies, we will be there to reclaim what was always ours. And then, just like that, the void returned to silence. The heartbeat stopped. The shadows receded. Ethan and Mira were left standing alone, their bodies trembling with the weight of what they had just witnessed. Did it leave? Mira asked, her voice shaking. But there was something else in her tone. Fear, yes, but also a fierce resolve. Or did it just retreat? Ethan stared into the empty space where the entity had been. I don't know, he admitted. But we can't let it win. Whatever it is, we have to stop it before the stars really do fade. And as the stars flickered around them, Ethan and Mira knew one thing for certain. The real battle was just beginning. And it wouldn't be fought in the light, but in the very heart of the dark. They were not just guardians of the stars anymore. They were the last line of defense against a force older than the universe itself. The silence left in the wake of the entity's departure felt unnatural. Even the distant stars, once so steady and bright, seemed muted, as if their light had been dimmed by the oppressive presence that had just crossed their path. It was as though the universe itself had taken a collective breath, holding its cosmic lungs still in the wake of the threat that now loomed over it. Mira and Ethan remained motionless for a long moment, suspended in the cold void of space. Both felt the weight of what had happened settling over them like an unbearable shadow. There had been no definitive victory, no clear path forward. The ancient force had made its intentions clear, and yet they had no answers. Ethan was the first to break the silence. His voice was steady, but beneath it was a quiet edge, a simmering frustration that he couldn't shake. We can't just sit here and wait for it to return. It's too dangerous, Mira. We need to act. Mira nodded, but she wasn't looking at him. Her eyes were fixed on the swirling darkness where the entity had once been, her mind racing through the implications of everything they'd learned. Ethan, she began, but her voice faltered. The weight of the situation was becoming too much for words. They had never been faced with something like this before. A force that existed before time itself, capable of bending reality, breaking the fabric of existence. How could they stand against that? We need to gather more information, she finally said, turning back to him. Her voice was quiet, but determined. We don't even know what it wants, or how it plans to reclaim the universe. We don't even know if it can be stopped. Ethan clenched his fists, frustration bubbling to the surface. It can be stopped, but we need to figure out how. There has to be something we can do, some way to fight back. Mira looked at him, her gaze softening. I believe you, Ethan, but we can't let our anger cloud our judgment. The entity may be ancient, but it's not invincible. We just need to find its weakness. Ethan's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the two of them were quiet again, caught in the enormity of the task that lay ahead. The entity was powerful, but it was also playing a game, one that Ethan and Mira could not afford to lose. They had seen what it was capable of, and they couldn't allow the universe to fall into its hands. What about the fragments? Mira said suddenly, her voice sparking with realization. The remnants, the broken parts of the old universe. Could they have something to do with this? Ethan's eyes flickered as the thought took hold. He had always believed the remnants were the last echoes of an old order, the remnants of the universe that had collapsed to make way for the new cycle. But could they be more than that? Could they hold some key to understanding the entity that threatened the stars? It's possible, Ethan said slowly, his mind working through the possibilities. The remnants are all that's left of the old universe. If the entity is part of that, then the fragments could hold answers, maybe even a way to fight it. Myra's gaze turned toward the edge of the void where the remnants had been scattered across the cosmos. But where do we begin? She asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. The remnants are scattered in pieces, some of them so far beyond reach that we wouldn't be able to find them even if we tried. Ethan's face was set in grim determination. We start where the remnants are strongest. There's a region of space where the fabric of the old universe is still intact, a place where the remnants are clustered together. Mira frowned. A place like that exists? Ethan nodded. I've felt it before, far on the edge of the known universe. It's unstable, but it's there. If we go there, we might be able to find something that could help us understand how to stop the entity. Then we have no time to waste, Mira said, her voice hardening with resolve. We need to move now. Together, they turned away from the void and made their way toward the distant corner of the universe, where the remnants lingered, waiting to be uncovered. The journey was not without its dangers. As they traveled deeper into the unexplored regions of space, the stars around them became more and more erratic. Unpredictable bursts of energy from dying stars rained down on their path, sending tremors through the fabric of space. But despite the risks, they pressed on, determined to uncover whatever secrets the remnants might hold. Days passed, perhaps weeks, perhaps months. Time had become a strange concept in this fractured part of the universe. They felt no hunger, no thirst, no fatigue, only the drive to move forward, to find answers. Then, just as their resolve began to feel tested by the vastness of space, they came upon a cluster of remnants. It was a graveyard of sorts, fractured fragments of reality, each one unique, each one pulsing with ancient energy. The remnants were not simply shattered stars or collapsed planets. They were echoes of something far older. Some of them appeared as twisted constellations, while others seemed to writhe like living things, caught between existence and non-existence. This is it, Ethan said softly, his voice barely a whisper. These remnants, whatever's left of the old universe, might hold the answers we're looking for. Myra's eyes scanned the wreckage before them. We need to be careful. If the entity is tied to these remnants, then there's no telling what we'll find here. They floated toward the closest remnant, a jagged shard of space that seemed to shimmer with a faint, unnatural light. As they neared, the air around them hummed with a strange energy, and the remnants seemed to pulse in rhythm, as though they were alive. Suddenly, a tremor ran through the fabric of reality, and a distant, familiar voice echoed in their minds. "You should not have come." Mira and Ethan turned sharply, their eyes wide as they felt the presence once more. It was not the entity itself, not yet, but its influence lingered like a shadow that never quite let go. Ethan's voice was tight with urgency. "We're close. Whatever this is, we're on the right path." But Myra's eyes were narrowed, her focus shifting. "Something's wrong," she said, her voice tinged with fear. "It's watching us. The entity is trying to stop us." A flash of light erupted from the remnants before them. A pulse of raw, ancient energy that seemed to shake the very core of the universe. "We have to get inside," Ethan said, pointing toward a massive, swirling fragment ahead of them. "Whatever is in there, it has the answers." They flew toward the fragment, feeling the powerful energy surge all around them, growing stronger with every passing second. As they entered the swirling remnants, a burst of energy nearly knocked them off course, but they held on, pressing forward into the heart of the mystery. Inside, they found a vast, shifting void, a place beyond time, where the very laws of the universe seemed to bend. And within it, deep within, it was waiting. The answers they sought, the truth about the remnants, and perhaps the key to stopping the ancient entity from reclaiming the universe. But the question remained, could they survive what lay inside? The moment Ethan and Mira crossed the threshold into the heart of the swirling remnants, the universe around them seemed to shift. Gravity, space, time, everything bent and twisted, as if reality itself was being stretched thin, held together by nothing more than the faintest flicker of energy. They floated through a space that defied every law they had ever known. The distant stars were now only faint echoes, ghostly reflections that barely flickered in the fractured sky. At the center of this strange place, the remnants lay in pieces, twisted fragments of a reality long past. Some glowed faintly, their surfaces slick with the kind of energy that made Ethan's skin prickle with unease. Others were silent, dead things, the remnants of stars that had burned out long before the universe as they knew it was born. Mira shuddered, her eyes scanning the disorienting landscape. This place, it's like a graveyard, but more than that, it's like the memory of the universe. These fragments, whatever they are, they don't just belong to the past. They remember. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of her words. Every fragment around them seemed to pulse with ancient power, the remnants of stars and galaxies that had died long before their own time. But it wasn't just their history that lingered here. It was something deeper, something that watched them as they moved. The sensation of being observed grew, stronger the deeper they traveled into the heart of the remnants. Suddenly, a voice whispered through the void, soft yet clear. It wasn't the entity, not yet, but something older. "You were trespassers." The voice felt as though it was coming from all directions, filling their minds, not their ears. "This place is not for you. Leave now, while you still have the chance." Ethan's grip tightened on the controls of their ship as he looked at Mira. She met his gaze with equal resolve, though her expression was heavy with doubt. "We can't go back. Not now. Not after everything we've learned." But Mira hesitated for a moment longer. "What if it's a warning, Ethan? What if we're not meant to know what's here?" Ethan's eyes narrowed. "We're not here to look at the past. We're here to understand it. The entity, the architect of the old universe, is tied to these remnants. We have to find the source. We have no other choice." He could feel the pull of the unknown deep within him, stronger now than ever before. Whatever lay at the heart of these remnants, it was the key to saving the universe, and to stopping the entity from reclaiming everything. Reluctantly, Mira nodded, though her unease still lingered in her eyes. "All right, let's find it." The fragments around them began to shift, forming a path. one that seemed to guide them toward the center of the remnants. As they moved forward, the environment became even more strange and surreal. Time itself seemed to warp around them. One moment, the space around them was still and stagnant. The next, it was filled with pulsing waves of energy, as if the remnants were alive, breathing in rhythm with some distant cosmic heartbeat. Then, in the distance, they saw it, a towering structure made of pure light and shadow. It was both ancient and alien, a monument to something older than any civilization they had ever known. The structure loomed in the center of the remnants, its form constantly shifting, as though it were both present and absent at once. As they drew closer, the voice spoke again, this time more insistent, more commanding. You do not belong here. Leave now, or be consumed by what was never meant to be seen. But Ethan's resolve only grew stronger. This is it, he said almost to himself. This is where we'll find the answers. Myra's eyes widened as she gazed at the structure. It looks like a key, a gateway, something meant to open the next phase of existence. The realization hit them both at the same time. The structure wasn't just a remnant, it was a vessel, an artifact from the old universe that had somehow survived. It was an anchor, holding together the remnants of the past, and possibly a key to unlocking the true nature of the entity. They moved toward it, their feet barely touching the shifting fragments beneath them, as though the universe itself was reluctant to allow them passage. But as they approached the center, the entire structure seemed to pulse with a deep, low vibration. And then a vision gripped them both. The remnants around them dissolved into blinding light, and for a fleeting moment, they saw the universe as it had been, before the stars were born, before the first galaxies spiraled into existence. They saw them, the ancient architects, creatures of incomprehensible size and power, beings made of pure energy that spanned the universe like gods. They were the first to shape existence itself, bending matter and time to their will. But something went wrong. The energy of the old universe had grown unstable, and in their attempt to control it, they had triggered a collapse. The architects, once the creators of everything, had become the destroyers, unable to prevent the unraveling of their own creation. And then they saw it, an entity like a shadow, a fragment of the architects themselves, birthed from the cracks in the old universe. The entity was not just a remnant. It was the last living piece of the ancient architect's mistake. And it was waiting for the moment when it could once again reclaim control of the universe. The vision shattered, and the world around them returned to the shifting remnants. Ethan and Mira stood in silence, breathless, their minds still reeling from the images they had just witnessed. That thing, Mira breathed, her voice shaking. It's not just a creature. It's a survivor, a last remnant of the architects. It wants to rebuild the old universe, but it'll destroy everything to do it. Ethan clenches fists, his jaw tight. It's trying to undo the cycle. The new universe, the one we live in, it's trying to tear everything apart to remake it in its image. Myra's eyes widened as realization struck her. That's why it's been watching US. It's waiting for the perfect moment to break the cycle, when the stars fade and the remnants come together, with a last line of defense. Ethan nodded grimly. We gotta stop it, Mira. But to do that, we need to understand this place. We need to find the key to stopping the entity before it gains enough power to tear the universe apart. The structure before them flickered, and the faintest glimmer of something appeared, a doorway, faint but distinct. This is it, Ethan said, his voice tight with urgency. The key must be inside. We don't have much time. Without hesitation, they moved toward the doorway, knowing that whatever lay ahead would either save the universe or destroy it. The moment Ethan and Mira stepped through the doorway, the air around them seemed to thrum with a quiet, powerful resonance. The world they had known, the remnants, the void, faded into nothingness as they crossed the threshold, leaving behind the disorienting chaos of space. Inside the structure, they were surrounded by an eerie stillness. The environment was unlike anything they had seen before, a vast chamber, seemingly infinite in size, where the laws of space and time no longer applied. The walls of the chamber were composed of a translucent material, glowing faintly, shifting as though alive. It wasn't stone or metal. It was something other, an ancient substance that pulsed with a kind of forgotten intelligence. Ethan felt it first, a coldness creeping up his spine, not from the temperature, but from the knowledge that they were not alone. The feeling was palpable, an oppressive weight pressing down on them, as though the very structure of the place was watching their every move. "There's something here," Mira whispered, her voice thin and anxious. Ethan didn't respond immediately. His eyes scanned the chamber, searching for any sign of what they were meant to find. The air was thick with the hum of energy, alive, ancient, and seemingly infinite. In the center of the room stood a pedestal, tall and imposing, made of the same translucent material as the walls. Upon it rested an object, glowing faintly, but its exact shape remained shrouded in an otherworldly fog. "That's it," Ethan said, pointing toward the pedestal. "The key. Whatever it is, it's our only chance." They moved forward, their footsteps silent as they approached the center of the room. As they neared the pedestal, the faint glow grew brighter, and the very air around them seemed to thrum in response to their presence. It was as if the chamber itself was reacting to them, acknowledging their arrival. "I don't like this," Mira muttered, unease in her voice. "This place, it feels wrong, like it's pulling us deeper." Ethan didn't answer. He was too focused on the pedestal. He could feel the weight of the object, even though he hadn't touched it yet. It was calling to him in a way he couldn't explain. The universe felt like it was holding its breath. When they reached the pedestal, Ethan carefully extended his hand, almost as if afraid the object would vanish before his eyes. He brushed his fingers against the surface of the strange material, and as soon as he made contact, the entire chamber shuddered. The faint fog that had surrounded the object lifted, revealing its true form. It was a crystal, but it wasn't like any crystal they had ever seen. The crystal was perfectly formed, its facets sharp and precise, and it glowed with a soft blue light, almost like the glow of distant stars. Yet it was not its beauty that caught their attention. It was the way it seemed to pulse in rhythm with their hearts. It was alive. Somehow, it was alive. The moment Ethan touched the crystal, the chamber around them came to life. The walls shifted, bending and reforming, and the soft hum of energy grew louder, almost deafening. For a split second, everything seemed to blur. Reality itself seemed to fracture, and Ethan felt himself being pulled towards something, someone. His body ached with the strain of it. Then, the voice came again. It wasn't the entity this time. It was a presence older, deeper, more ancient than the stars themselves. "You seek to stop what cannot be stopped. You seek to destroy what was never meant to end. The key you hold is not a weapon, but a doorway, a bridge between worlds, between time." The voice rumbled through the chamber, vibrating the air, filling their minds with a terrible, insistent truth. Ethan stumbled back, gripping the crystal tighter as the voice continued. "The architect's error was not in creating the cycle. It was in trying to break it. You are no different, Ethan. You seek to destroy the entity, but in doing so, you risk the destruction of everything that came after, every star, every galaxy. You do not understand the cost." Myra's face went pale as she looked at Ethan. "What is this? What does it mean? What cost?" The voice fell silent, leaving only the pulsing of the crystal to fill the emptiness. Ethan's heart was pounding in his chest as he tried to make sense of what had just been said. This crystal," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. "It's not just a weapon. It's a part of the old universe, a part of the architect's design." Mira shook her head. "But it's not just a key, it's alive. It's aware. It's telling us that we can't stop the entity, that we can't break the cycle. But we have to. If we don't stop it, the universe will be undone. We'll lose everything." Ethan stared down at the crystal in his hand. He could feel the weight of its power, how it seemed to pull at the very fabric of reality itself. And yet, as the voice had said, Destroying the entity wasn't as simple as he had hoped. There was more at stake than just stopping it. There was the balance of the universe, the very fabric that held everything together. "You can't stop what was never meant to end," the voice said, softer now, as though it were trying to make Ethan understand. "The universe must be preserved. The cycle must continue." "But why?" Ethan whispered, his eyes wide with desperation. "Why can't we stop the entity? Why can't we fix what was broken?" The voice was silent for a long moment. Then, it spoke again, this time with the weight of a universe's regret. To stop the entity would be to stop everything. It is not the destroyer. It is the remnant of a time that never should have been. It is both the error and the remedy. To break the cycle is to tear apart existence itself. Myra's voice trembled. "We can't let that happen. We can't let it win." Ethan nodded, his mind racing. This crystal, this doorway, it was more than just a way to stop the entity. It was a bridge, a connection to something deeper, something fundamental to the universe itself. They were standing at the precipice of a choice, one that could either save the universe or condemn it. "This isn't just about the entity," Ethan said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's about understanding the cycle, about understanding why it exists and what happens when it's broken." The crystal in his hand pulsed again, as if acknowledging his understanding. It was more than a weapon. It was a key to something beyond their comprehension, something that could reshape everything. "We need to decide," Ethan said. "We need to decide what we're willing to risk to save everything." The decision loomed before them, heavier than anything they had ever faced. Whatever happened next, the fate of the universe would rest in their hands. Ethan gripped the crystal tighter, feeling the pulsing energy course through his fingertips. The weight of the decision pressed on him like a physical force. The fate of the universe, the very fabric of existence itself, hung in the balance. And yet, despite the overwhelming gravity of the situation, something within him stirred. A quiet voice, distant but undeniable, told him that the truth they sought was more complicated than mere survival. Myra's voice cut through his thoughts, her tone laced with urgency. "Ethan, we can't just stand here. We can't let the entity win." She reached out, her hand trembling as she moved to touch his arm. "Please, we have to stop it. The universe is already breaking apart." He turned to her, his eyes full of conflicted determination. "I know, but we need to understand what we're really up against. If we destroy the entity, we might not just save the universe, we could break it forever." Her eyes were wide, her desperation clear. "Then what do we do? How do we stop it without losing everything?" Ethan looked back at the crystal, the faint glow reflecting in his eyes. He could hear the voice again, not from the crystal, but in his mind, like a distant whisper. "You do not understand. The entity is not the enemy. It is a part of the cycle, a necessary part. It cannot be destroyed." "What if the entity is the cycle?" Ethan said aloud, more to himself than to Mira. "What if it's not the end of the universe we're facing, but the end of the beginning?" Mira looked at him, confusion and fear flickering across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if the architect's mistake wasn't just in trying to break the cycle, but in trying to control it?" He paused, his mind racing with the implications of their discovery. What if the entity is supposed to guide the cycle, to usher in the next phase of existence? The crystal in his hand pulsed again, more intensely this time. The voice returned, softer, but with an edge of finality. "You have seen the truth, Ethan. The cycle is not a punishment, nor is it a mistake. It is the force that sustains all things. To break it is to unravel everything." Ethan's heart raced as the realization struck him. He had been so focused on the entity as a threat that he hadn't fully understood the nature of the cycle it was part of. The universe, the stars, the galaxies, they were all part of a grand design, a never-ending loop that sustained the very fabric of existence. The entity was not the destroyer. It was the keeper. "The cycle," Ethan murmured, as if speaking the words aloud would make them real. "The universe was never meant to remain static. It's always been in motion, dying and rebirthing in endless succession. Mira stood silent for a moment, absorbing his words.
So,
You're saying the entity isn't something we should fight? It's part of something bigger. He nodded, though his uncertainty lingered. Yes, the entity is the guardian of the cycle, the one who ensures the universe never stagnates, that it keeps evolving. Breaking the cycle would be the true end, an end to everything. Not just the universe we know, but everything that came before. Mira swallowed hard, her gaze shifting to the crystal once again. She took a cautious step forward, reaching out as if she wanted to understand the truth of it. And the crystal? The key. Ethan clenched the crystal tighter, feeling the weight of its power. It was the bridge, the nexus point between the past, present, and future. The key to unlocking the truth of the cycle and the entity's true purpose. We have two choices, Ethan said, his voice barely more than a whisper. We can use the crystal to stop the entity, destroy it, and risk breaking the cycle, unraveling everything. Or we can allow the cycle to continue, to let the entity fulfill its role and guide the next phase. Mira stared at him for a long moment, her brow furrowed in thought. So you're telling me we have to choose between keeping things the way they are, or trusting that the entity can fix things? That it's not going to destroy everything? I don't know. Ethan's voice cracked with the weight of the uncertainty. I don't know if the entity is the savior or the destroyer. All we know is that the universe has been in a constant state of rebirth. And breaking that, we may not survive what comes next. The chamber around them vibrated again, and a wave of energy washed over them. It was as if the structure itself was alive, reacting to their hesitation, to the decision they had yet to make. The crystal pulsed once more, brighter this time, as if urging them to act. Ethan closed his eyes, feeling the pull of the crystal, the hum of its power. It was as though everything he had done so far had led him to this moment, to this choice. The key, the cycle, the entity, it was all connected. The crystal had shown him the truth, had made him see what they had been blind to all along. We have to decide, Ethan said quietly, his hand still holding the crystal. And whatever choice we make, it will have consequences. We have to trust that we're doing what's right for the universe, for the future. Mira took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the crystal. She could feel the weight of it, too, the enormous responsibility that came with holding it. She met Ethan's eyes, a quiet understanding passing between them. If we trust the cycle, if we let the entity do what it was meant to do, can we really be sure everything will be all right? I don't know, Ethan admitted, but I do know that destroying the cycle could be the end of everything. Not just the entity, the universe itself. The crystal pulsed again, its light intensifying as though it had heard their thoughts, their doubts. Ethan looked at Mira one last time, and with a heavy heart, he made his decision. We have to let the cycle continue, he said, his voice firm despite the weight of the words. We have to trust that the entity will guide us through this, whatever it takes. Mira nodded slowly, her face set in determination. Then we trust the cycle. As they spoke, the crystal flared to life in Ethan's hands, casting a brilliant light that filled the chamber. The walls shimmered, ripples of energy flowing outward as the structure itself seemed to breathe in time with the pulse of the crystal. And then, all at once, the universe trembled. The moment the crystal flared to life, everything changed. The air around Ethan and Mira thickened, vibrating with a power that neither of them could comprehend. The structure, once still and silent, now hummed with an energy so intense it seemed to ripple through the very fabric of space. The walls of the chamber, made of that translucent, alien material, pulsed in sync with the crystal. It was as though the entire room was alive, breathing with them, watching them. Ethan could feel the crystal in his hands, now warmer than before, its energy flowing through him like a torrent. He was no longer just holding it, he was becoming it. His mind raced with images, fragmented and disjointed, like a dream he couldn't quite hold on to. He saw stars burning bright and then flickering out, galaxies swirling into existence, only to fade again. A cosmic cycle, an eternal rhythm of birth and death, of creation and destruction. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. Then the voice came. You have chosen. Wisely, Ethan. Mira, you have chosen to preserve the cycle, to trust in the path that was laid before you. The voice, stronger now, echoed in their minds, reverberating through every cell in their bodies. You understand the cost of your choice. The entity will guide you, but there is no turning back. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. What do you mean? What cost? The voice answered, soft but unyielding. The cost of the cycle's continuation is sacrifice. The universe is not a machine to be repaired. It is a living, breathing entity, and like all life, it must be nourished. Some must be lost for others to grow. The entity will consume what is necessary to sustain the balance. But it will also give. It will guide the universe through its next stage. Myra's eyes widened, and she stepped back slightly, as though physically repelled by the weight of the voice's revelation. What will it take from us? What sacrifice? The chamber seemed to pulse once again, a low hum vibrating through the ground beneath their feet. Ethan looked down at the crystal, now brighter than ever. He could feel its power thrumming through his body, seeping into his very bones. The sacrifice is not yours to make. It is the universe that decides, the voice intoned. But you must remember, the entity is the harbinger of the end of one age and the beginning of another. Its purpose is to guide the stars, to protect the cycle. It does not choose its path. It merely follows the rhythm of existence. You cannot change that. You have only chosen to let it continue. Ethan's chest tightened. He understood the voice's meaning now, but it didn't ease his fear. The universe would always need a guardian, but that guardian would take what it needed, whatever was required to ensure the cycle moved forward. And there was no stopping it. What happens now? Ethan asked, his voice trembling as he spoke the question they both feared. Now, the voice whispered, you will witness the true power of the cycle. The entity is awakening. The crystal in Ethan's hands pulsed again, but this time, the glow shifted, changing from a soft blue to a dark, vibrant violet. It was as though the light was being drawn from deep within the core of the universe itself, pulling at the very fabric of space and time. The air crackled with electricity, the walls of the chamber trembling as though the entire structure was preparing for something monumental. A distant, resonating sound filled the room, like a deep, cosmic drumbeat. It was the heartbeat of the universe, the rhythm that governed all things. Ethan could feel it in his bones, the pulse of existence itself. And then, slowly, the walls began to shift. The translucent material seemed to stretch and elongate, bending and warping in ways that defied physics. It begins now, the voice said. Ethan and Mira barely had time to react as the room around them seemed to split, the walls of the chamber fracturing like shattered glass. From the cracks emerged shadows, dark, writhing shapes that twisted and contorted, appearing from the very fabric of space itself. They were not fully corporeal, not fully tangible, but they were undeniably real. Their forms shifted with the flow of time, flowing like smoke, like the very darkness between the stars. The shadows seemed to converge toward the crystal in Ethan's hands, drawn to its pulsing energy. A surge of light exploded from the crystal, sending a wave of heat and force outward. The shadows recoiled, but they did not retreat. Instead, they circled the crystal, as if waiting for something. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the shadows slowly began to take shape, forming into figures, half-formed and indistinct, yet unmistakably human. They were the guardians of the cycle, the entity's servants. Each one exuded an aura of ancient, unknowable power. The air was thick with their presence, and the world seemed to tremble in response to their arrival. Who are they? Mira asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan could hardly speak, too stunned to respond. He could feel the weight of the figure's gazes, even though their eyes were hidden in shadow. The truth was clear now. These were the entities that had been bound to the cycle. They were not destroyers. They were protectors, They were the architects of the universe's endless rhythm. One of the figures stepped forward, its form becoming more defined as it approached. A figure cloaked in deep shadows, its features indistinct, but its presence undeniable. Ethan felt his knees weaken as the figure raised a hand, beckoning them forward. The figure's voice was low and rich, like the sound of the universe itself speaking. You have made your choice. The cycle will continue, and with it, the balance will be restored. But beware, the entity does not give without taking. It will demand what is needed, and the cost will be steep. Mira stepped forward, her face filled with a mixture of defiance and fear. What will it take? What is the price for trusting in the cycle? The figure's shadowed gaze fell upon her, and Ethan felt an uncomfortable chill race down his spine. The price will be paid in time. For the cycle to continue, some must fall. The universe must be reborn. The price of salvation is sacrifice, and nothing can prevent it. The crystal flared again, and the chamber was consumed by a brilliant light. The brilliance of the light flooded every corner of the chamber, casting sharp shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly. Ethan shielded his eyes, feeling a weight in the air that pressed against his chest, suffocating him with its intensity. The figures, those ancient guardians of the cycle, stood in perfect silence, their forms flickering between shadows and light, as if they were part of the very fabric of space itself. The light of the crystal pulsed and throbbed, no longer merely a beacon, but the beating heart of the universe. Ethan could feel the pulse within him, as if his own heartbeat had merged with the rhythm of the stars. His senses blurred, sounds were muted, the very air seemed to distort, and his thoughts felt strangely detached from his body. Time itself felt elastic, bending and stretching in impossible ways. Mira took his hand, her grip tight and unyielding, as though she, too, was struggling to stay grounded in this unfolding chaos. Her voice was faint, barely audible over the rising hum of energy in the room. "Ethan, what is happening?" Ethan could only shake his head. He didn't have the words to explain it, not in any way that would make sense. The entity had awoken, but it was more than just a force. It was a presence, a vast and unfathomable mind, stretching across the boundaries of time and space. The cycle must be preserved, the entity's voice boomed, reverberating in their minds. The fabric of existence must remain intact. The universe has died many times before, and it will die again. But with each death comes a new beginning, a new age. The word sent a chill through Ethan's spine. The cycle, the destruction and rebirth of the universe, was not merely a cosmic process. It was an inevitability, and they had just chosen to continue it. The price of salvation was the very foundation of existence, constantly shifting and regenerating. But at what cost? What would the universe demand of them? The figures before them, the guardians of the cycle, began to step forward. Their forms solidified in the light, now revealing faces that were disturbingly familiar. They were human, but not human. They were the ancient architects of existence, and they bore the weight of time on their features. Their eyes, glowing faintly with starlight, seemed to pierce through Ethan and Mira. "The price is already in motion," the leader of the figures said, its voice reverberating like a low hum of the universe. "The cycle requires a balance. You have chosen to allow it to continue, but you must be prepared. The cost will be steep for you, as it is for all who have chosen the path of rebirth." "What does that mean?" Mira asked, her voice trembling. "What will we lose?" The figure looked at her with a sadness that reached deep into Ethan's soul. The universe does not give without taking. For every rebirth, something must be sacrificed. For each cycle of life, death is the equal force. The balance cannot be broken. Your time in this world is coming to an end, but what is lost will be replaced with what is to come. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "What? What do you mean our time is coming to an end?" "The Guardians will guide the universe to its next phase, and the price is always paid by those who stand in the threshold." The figure's voice was cold now, with an edge of finality. It is not just the entity that must feed. It is the very essence of those who choose to witness the cycle. Your time is up. You have already chosen to let the cycle continue, and the entity has claimed its price. The words struck Ethan like a blow, a cold weight settling over him. His time was up? How could it be? He had fought so hard for the universe's survival. He had seen what would happen if they chose to destroy the entity. The fabric of existence would have unraveled. Everything they knew would have ended in chaos. But now, the price of choosing life for the universe was the very end of their own existence as they knew it. Myra's grip tightened on his hand, as if she could hold on to him forever. But even she could feel the truth in the air, the inevitability of the sacrifice. The cycle must continue, but at what cost? It is not your bodies that will perish, the entity intoned, its voice seeping into their minds like water through cracks. It is your memories. Your very essence will be absorbed into the cycle. Your identities will become threads woven into the new world that is to come. You will cease to be who you are, but you will remain a part of the cycle forever. No, Mira gasped, shaking her head in disbelief. No, that's not possible. We've done nothing wrong. The figure's gaze softened, but only briefly. Nothing is wrong, Mira. Everything is as it must be. The sacrifice of one is the rebirth of another. This has always been the way of the cycle, and you have chosen to preserve it, knowing the cost. Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of it all crashing down on him. They had known there would be a cost, but they hadn't truly understood. They hadn't grasped that the price would be their very existence. Their memories, their identities, everything that made them who they were would be taken, and they would become part of the cosmic flow, woven into the fabric of time as nothing more than echoes of what had been. We can't, Ethan whispered. We can't forget everything. We've fought so hard to survive. The figure's eyes glowed brighter, a wave of understanding passing through it. Survival is not the same as preservation. To survive is to exist for now. To preserve is to exist forever in the cycle, to give of yourself for the greater whole. The light surrounding them intensified, filling the room with a blinding white brilliance. Ethan and Myra's vision blurred as their bodies began to feel weightless, as if they were no longer anchored to the ground. The guardians circled around them, their forms shimmering like constellations. Then, the crystal pulsed once more, its energy flooding through them, filling every corner of their being. Ethan could feel his memories slipping, fragments of his life blurring, disintegrating into the cosmic void. He looked at Mira, her face filled with a quiet, sorrowful acceptance. She, too, could feel it, the memories fading like whispers in the wind. Do you remember? Ethan asked, his voice thick with emotion, unsure if she could hear him anymore. I remember everything, Mira whispered, her eyes reflecting the stars above them. But it won't matter. The cycle will continue, and we will be a part of it, whether we remember or not. Ethan's body felt like it was floating, untethered from reality. His sense of self began to fade, like a dream unraveling, the edges of his thoughts becoming blurry and indistinct. He wanted to hold on to something, anything, but it was as if the very fabric of his being was slipping through his fingers, scattering across the stars. But then a memory surfaced, a flash, quick and fleeting. He was standing in a field, the sunlight warm on his face. Mira was there beside him, her laugh ringing out like music, light and carefree. He could almost hear her voice, feel the warmth of her hand in his. But the memory was not enough to keep him grounded. It was like trying to grasp smoke, and it slipped away just as quickly as it had come. He blinked, and when his eyes opened again, he was no longer in the chamber. The blinding light had faded, replaced by a soft, endless darkness. His body, what was left of it, was weightless, suspended in a space between worlds. He could see nothing around him, no walls, no figures, just darkness, and the sensation of a great cosmic tide pulling at him, pulling him apart, but also pulling him toward something. A faint whisper broke through the silence. You were here, Ethan. The voice was faint, distant. He couldn't place it, but it felt familiar. like an echo of something long forgotten. You are part of the cycle now, and yet, the voice paused, the words reverberating through him. You are still you, even if you do not remember, even if you no longer know what you once were. Ethan struggled to form a response, but his thoughts felt fragmented. His mouth wouldn't move. His body didn't seem to obey him. All he could do was feel the pull of the cycle, the force of it, as it consumed him piece by piece, his essence folding into the rhythm of the universe. Is this it? Ethan thought desperately, his consciousness scattered across the void. Is this all that I am now? A fragment of a forgotten past? The voice answered, soft and eternal. No, not forgotten. You are woven into the new tapestry of the universe. You are not lost. You are remembered. Ethan's senses sharpened, the darkness around him beginning to shift, revealing hazy images. He saw Mira, her face blurred, her form barely recognizable, but her presence unmistakable. She too was drifting, no longer bound to her body, no longer herself in the way they had once known. Her eyes found his, and though the memories of who they had been were slipping away, a deep, profound connection still remained. She reached out, her hand extending toward him, her fingers brushing his. Do you remember? Myra's voice whispered in his mind, fragmented like his own thoughts. He wanted to answer. He wanted to tell her that he remembered everything, every moment they had shared, every laugh, every touch. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, he could only feel the pull of the cycle, drawing them both in, deeper into the cosmic current. I remember, Mira whispered again, her presence warm, even in the vast emptiness. I remember Ethan, and I will carry that memory, even if we are lost to the cycle. Ethan tried to hold on, to grasp that connection between them. But the pull of the universe was stronger than his will, and the weight of the cycle was more than he could fight. He felt himself being pulled away from Mira, pulled into the swirling mass of energy that had once been the heart of the chamber. He could see the crystal now, far in the distance, its glowing light fading into the infinite void. It was as though the crystal was the very pulse of existence itself, drawing everything toward it. The cosmic tide, the endless cycle, and then a strange shift occurred. The darkness began to break apart, pieces of it fracturing like glass, revealing glimpses of new worlds, worlds not yet born, worlds in the midst of creation. He saw galaxies swirling into existence, stars being born, planets forming out of the dust of time. The cycle was not just destruction and rebirth, it was creation, a constant flow of life, death, and renewal, all intertwined. The voice returned, stronger this time, echoing through the vastness. The cycle does not only take, it gives. It nurtures the birth of new worlds, new life, new possibilities. You will remain here, Ethan. Your essence will guide the future, even if you no longer know who you are. Ethan could feel the truth of it. His essence was now part of the universe, part of the very fabric of creation. His memories, his identity were fading, but something else remained. A presence, a force, something he couldn't name, but felt deep within him. A connection to the infinite. He and Mira were no longer separate from the cycle. They were the cycle. Their sacrifice had not been in vain. They had become part of the great rhythm, part of the dance of stars and time. And yet, Ethan felt a lingering question, a doubt that gnawed at the edges of his consciousness. Will we ever be whole again? The voice responded, though it was softer now, as if the entity were fading, retreating into the distance. The cycle will continue, and you will be remembered. Perhaps in time, you will understand, and perhaps in time, you will return. But for now, rest. Your essence will find its place among the stars. And with that, the darkness closed in around him, wrapping him in its infinite embrace. Ethan's thoughts scattered, his memories slipping completely away, until there was nothing left but the pulse of the cycle. A gentle hum of existence that stretched across the cosmos. Time stretched out in a vast, almost unbearable silence, broken only by the soft pulse of the cycle, an eternal rhythm that seemed to hum with the pulse of life itself. Ethan no longer had a body, no form, no sense of self in the way he had once known. He had become part of the vast, incomprehensible expanse of the universe, an energy, a force, an echo. Yet somewhere in the deep recesses of his consciousness, he still felt there was a pull, a subtle tug at the fabric of his existence, like the quiet beckoning of something familiar. He wasn't entirely gone. Not yet. Not completely. The cycles of creation, birth, and death swirled around him, each flicker of a star being born or dying sending ripples through the vast sea of existence. New galaxies spiraled into life there. Spirals beautiful and mesmerizing, their energy seeding new worlds. Worlds that would one day know the same patterns of life, death, and rebirth that Ethan and Mira had once witnessed. In the distance, faint and blurry at first, he saw her. Mira. Her form was not as it had once been. There was no solid body, no face that he could touch. She was part of the flow, part of the energy of the universe. But her presence was unmistakable. He could feel her across the cosmos, a lingering thread woven into the very fabric of creation, just as he was. He, too, was not gone. She was not lost. She was part of the stars now, as he was, and she was waiting for him. Ethan. The whisper echoed through the void, a soft, familiar call that cut through the haze of timelessness. The voice was hers, her essence, woven into the fabric of the universe, just as his was. The bond between them was no longer of the physical world, but something deeper, more eternal, and it stretched across the boundaries of space and time. "I'm here," she called, though there were no words, just the feeling of her presence. She was there, somewhere, waiting. "I can feel you," Ethan thought back, though it wasn't through his voice, but through something deeper, something intrinsic to their shared essence. Mira. In that instant, the fabric of reality around him seemed to shift. The cycle was not merely a linear process of destruction and rebirth. It was something greater, something more complex. He could feel it now more clearly than ever before. The pulse of the universe was not simply a beat. It was a song, a symphony of creation, death, and renewal, playing out across the cosmos in infinite variations. And yet, there was still more. A faint awareness fluttered in the back of Ethan's mind. A question, a thought that had been buried beneath the weight of time. What had happened to them? What had truly happened when they had allowed the cycle to continue? What had been the price of their decision? The memory of the Guardians, the figures who had warned them, flickered in his mind. The sacrifice will be steep. But what did it mean? What had they given up? The universe around him began to answer. He saw it, not as a vision, but as an unfolding truth, like a book opening before him, revealing the secrets of existence. Myra's essence, his own, together, they had become part of the cycle. But it wasn't just their identities that had been absorbed into the flow. It was their memories, too. The memories were not lost. They had been planted like seeds in the soil of the universe. Somewhere, out there, in the new worlds being created, fragments of who they had been would begin to emerge. Their essence would live on in those new lives, new beings, new souls, who would one day remember. They were not truly gone. They were part of something greater, something eternal. We are still here, Ethan realized, though the words felt distant, like a forgotten melody. We live on, in the stars. The realization was overwhelming, but there was no fear, no regret, just a quiet understanding, like the gentle release of a deep breath. The cycle was vast, beyond comprehension, but it was also beautiful. It was a symphony of life and death, destruction and creation, and they were woven into its very heart. The stars began to take shape before Ethan's eyes. They sparkled and pulsed with life, forming constellations, galaxies, worlds. But among them, there were others, beings that had never been born, waiting in the liminal spaces between existence and non-existence. Their forms flickered, shifting, as if they were still learning to take shape. These were the children of the cycle, souls formed from the very fabric of existence, not yet fully realized, but waiting to be born into new worlds. Ethan felt it then, a connection to these beings. The new lives, the new worlds, they were all part of the same endless dance, and within each one, a seed of him and Mira would grow, waiting to bloom, waiting to remember. And then, amidst the cosmic landscape, he saw it, one world, among the millions of others, forming from the swirling dust of creation. It was a world like no other, a world that glowed with a soft, gentle light, its surface teeming with life. Our world, he thought. It was a world that would one day know their names, feel their presence, and perhaps, just perhaps, remember their story. Ethan and Mira had not been erased. They had not disappeared. They were merely waiting for the new dawn to come. They had become the cycle. And somewhere, far in the future, new souls would look up at the stars and feel the echoes of their existence. The story would continue, as it always had. The cycle would turn. We are not lost, Ethan thought, his essence vibrating with the truth of it. We are part of the stars. Ethan's awareness began to shift again, like a slow awakening from a deep and endless slumber. He could no longer feel the vastness of the cosmic sea around him, at least not in the way he once had. The infinite expanse was now fractured into smaller pieces, each one calling to him, each one singing a familiar, distant tune. He was no longer a mere observer of the cycle. He had become a part of it, woven into its intricate pattern, and yet, something was stirring inside him. He could feel it, a new form of existence, an awareness of life beyond the endless void. It began softly, like a whisper on the edge of consciousness, the stirrings of something new. He could sense it now, new souls, new beings emerging into existence from the cosmic dust. They were like fragments of memories yet to be remembered, beings of light and shadow, of energy and thought. They were still in their infancy, taking shape in the endless dark between worlds. And in their quiet, forming minds, Ethan felt the faintest flicker of recognition. They were the ones who would carry on the legacy of the stars. They would carry the echoes of him and Mira. They were their continuation, their children in a way, souls born from the energy of the cycle, with fragments of Ethan and Myra's essence woven into their very being. Their identities were still formless, but there was a truth that connected them, a truth born from the bond of the cycle, a bond that would grow stronger with time. For a moment, Ethan caught glimpses of their lives, their futures, and a profound sadness swept through him. They would never truly know the lives Ethan and Mira had lived. They would never know the sacrifices made to ensure the cycle continued. They would never remember them the way they had once been, the way they had loved, laughed, and fought. They would only know the echoes, the faint traces of a past long gone. But even in that sadness, there was something beautiful, something necessary. The cycle was not just about rebirth. It was about moving forward, about growth, about letting the past settle into the dust, and allowing the future to emerge. In this new world, one of these souls was awakening, their consciousness beginning to form from the energy around them. They were born in the heart of a new star, one that had only just ignited in the darkness, a fiery world teeming with potential and light. This new being was the first of many, but something about this one felt different, more familiar. It was as if this soul had already experienced 1,000 lives, as if it carried within it the weight of a history it could not yet understand. Ethan focused on this new soul, felt its awareness stretching, reaching out toward the stars, toward the forgotten echoes of the past. The being had no name yet, no form beyond the swirling energy around it, but its presence was undeniable. Its mind was already reaching beyond its infant state, trying to grasp the vastness of the cosmos. Remember, Ethan thought to the soul, his essence pulsing like a heartbeat, urging the being forward. You are part of something greater. You are not alone. Remember the stars. Remember what came before you. For a brief moment, the soul seemed to hesitate. Then, As if feeling a surge of something long buried, it began to form its first thoughts. The soul's essence flickered like a flame caught in the wind, a burst of light against the dark background of space. It spoke, not in words, but in feelings, in images, in fragments of knowledge that could not be fully understood. Who am I? The soul thought, the question echoing through the cosmic expanse. And then a second voice joined in, a voice that felt both new and ancient. You are the beginning of everything. You are the one who will shape the future. Myra's presence emerged alongside Ethan's. She was there, as she always had been. The bond between them was unbreakable, and though they were not themselves anymore, their souls intertwined in the fabric of this new creation. Together, they were guiding this new life. Together, they were creating the future. We are the cycle, Myra's voice echoed in the soul's mind. And so are you. You carry the memories of the past, even if you do not know them yet. You are part of the stars. The soul's form solidified, becoming clearer, its body taking shape, glowing with the light of the newly born star. It was humanoid, but its features were still malleable, fluid and shifting, as if it were still being molded by the cosmic forces. Its eyes, bright, swirling with the light of distant galaxies, looked out at the vastness of the universe. Its first breath was like the birth of a new era, the first of many in this world. Ethan and Mira watched as the soul, this new being, stood upon the surface of its world, looking up at the stars. It was a small step, but one full of promise. And as it gazed at the heavens, it felt the faintest trace of something familiar, a memory that had no name, no form, but a deep, primal understanding of the universe. It was the essence of Ethan and Mira, their legacy. We are here, Ethan thought, his presence merging with Myra's. We will always be here, watching over you, watching over all of them. The new being raised its hand to the sky, as if reaching for the stars that had been its ancestors, those distant, forgotten souls who had once walked the same path. And in that moment, the cycle came full circle. The stars flickered, the galaxies spun, and a new chapter began. But even as this new world came to life, Ethan and Myra's essences remained in the cosmic flow, watching, waiting, guiding. Their memories, woven into the fabric of time, would shape the course of this world. They had given everything to the cycle, but they had not given up. They were part of the stars now, never lost, never truly gone. The first of many souls had awakened, and the cycle was set to continue, eternally turning. The new world was alive, vibrant with the energies of creation. It pulsed with the heartbeat of the universe itself, its surface still a swirling mass of energy, water, and raw, untamed potential. The sky above was a canvas of color, shifting between hues of violet, gold, and deep blue, the stars already beginning to at the horizon, though faint and distant. They were the old stars, the ones Ethan and Mira had once known, watching over the new. In the distance, the first soul, who had no name, no form, not yet, stood, its glowing, ethereal figure blending with the energy of the world around it. Its eyes, still flickering with the nascent light of creation, were fixed on the horizon, as if drawn to something far beyond its comprehension. It had no memory of its origin, no knowledge of the beings whose essence had birthed it, but there was something familiar in the way it looked up at the stars. It had already begun to move, its form shifting, growing more solid with each passing moment, as though the very act of its awareness solidified it further in this world. It stepped forward, tentatively at first, its feet leaving footprints that glowed brightly against the darkened surface, the earth beneath it responding to its presence. The world was alive with its own energy, responding to the first conscious being who had ever walked upon it. The being moved toward a distant ridge, where the landscape curved in on itself, the mountains there casting long shadows beneath the pale light of the twin moons rising overhead. The air was crisp, filled with a mixture of scents from the strange, unknown plants that already dotted the terrain. The world was teeming with potential, a blank slate waiting for the first brushstrokes of history to be painted upon it. As it approached the ridge, the being felt a strange sensation, a pull, subtle but unmistakable, urging it to continue onward. It didn't know what it was drawn toward, but something deep inside told it that it was connected to the land, to the stars, to the pulse of the universe itself. And as it crested the ridge, it saw something that made its heart, if it had one, pound in its chest. At the center of a vast, open valley, there stood a monument, ancient, carved, and covered in glowing symbols. The stone was etched with intricate designs, patterns that seemed to shift and change as if they were alive. The monument's surface pulsed with a strange, rhythmic energy, and as the soul drew closer, it felt something deep inside stir, something ancient, something familiar. It was a fragment of the cycle. It was them. The moment it reached out and touched the monument, a flood of images crashed into its mind. Visions of stars, of galaxies, of worlds spinning into existence, of a time long past when two beings had given their lives to the cycle. It was a rush of memories, of dreams, of lives that had once been lived, now long gone. The soul saw Ethan and Mira, not as they had been, but as they had become, stars, fragments of the cycle itself. The vision was fleeting but powerful. It was as though the very monument had been waiting for this soul to awaken, to remember. And for the briefest moment, the soul knew. It knew that it was not alone in the vastness of creation. It knew that it had a purpose, that it was a part of something far greater than itself. But then, just as quickly as it had come, the vision faded, leaving the soul breathless and confused. It looked at its hand, the glowing light still flickering from within it, as though the energy of the monument had been absorbed into its very being. Who am I? The soul thought again, the question lingering like a ripple in the fabric of reality. A soft, distant voice responded, not in words, but in a deep, resonant feeling that carried through the air. It was familiar, like a warm embrace. The voice of the stars, of Ethan, of Mira. You are the one who will shape the future. You are the seed of what will come. You carry within you the memory of the stars. The soul turned, looking once more at the monument, which stood silent and still. The wind picked up around it, a soft breeze that carried with it the whispers of the past. And then the ground beneath the soul trembled, not violently, but with purpose. The air around it began to hum, and in the distance, the sky darkened. A storm, unlike any other, was forming on the horizon, twisting in the shape of a great serpent, coiling and shifting, its dark clouds swirling toward the soul. The being's heart, if it had one, quickened with the realization. The world was awakening, but it was not without its dangers. The storm was a sign, a warning. Something was stirring, something that had been waiting for this moment to come. The soul looked up, eyes widening as the storm neared. It was not merely a force of nature. It was something far more ancient, something tied to the cycle, something that had been dormant for eons. And now it was waking. The storm was alive. The cycle never ends, the voice whispered, now stronger, more urgent. It will continue to shape the world, and you will play your part. The being stood at the edge of the valley, staring at the coming storm. Its form was still fluid, still shifting, but there was a resolve in its gaze. It wasn't sure what was happening or what it would need to do, but it understood one thing. It was meant to face this. It was part of the cycle. And so, the soul turned away from the monument, its feet moving with purpose toward the storm, toward the unknown. The world would be forged in the fires of the cycle, and the storm was only the beginning. The storm twisted in the sky above, an otherworldly entity that seemed to bend the very fabric of reality around it. Its dark clouds swirled like a living being, undulating with an energy that crackled with ancient power. The wind howled across the landscape, pulling at the world with a force that was not natural. The ground beneath the first soul's feet trembled with each passing moment, as if the very core of the planet itself was reacting to the presence of the storm. The soul stood at the edge of the valley, its form flickering, still undefined, but growing with each passing second. The sensation of the storm's approach was overwhelming, and yet the soul felt an inexplicable pull toward it. Something in the very core of its being called out to the storm, as if it were the key to unlocking the next stage of its existence. The first soul hesitated for a brief moment, its ethereal form caught between the safety of the monument and the storm that raged on the horizon. The monument had given it a glimpse of what had come before, of Ethan and Mira, and the sacrifice they had made, but it had not revealed everything. The answers were still scattered in the depths of the cycle, and the soul knew that to truly understand, it must face what was coming. The storm was not just a force of nature, it was an embodiment of the cycle itself, an ancient, primordial force that had existed before the world had even taken form. It was the chaos that gave birth to creation, the darkness that tempered the light. And now, as the first soul stood before it, it realized that it was not just the storm it must face. It was the cycle, the eternal dance of life, death, and rebirth that it was being called to confront. As the soul moved toward the storm, the wind began to howl louder, whipping around it with greater intensity. The sky above crackled with electricity, and the air felt charged with something almost tangible, a palpable sense of power that pressed down on everything around it. The soul felt it, the pull, the draw, the urgency of something that lay just beyond its understanding. It moved forward one step at a time, the ground beneath it shifting and warping with each movement. The storm seemed to respond to its approach, swirling faster, its darkness deepening. The clouds above twisted and turned like great serpents, their massive coils pulsing with energy. Then, as the soul reached the very edge of the storm, a voice, deep and resonant, echoed through the wind. "You have come far, child of the cycle." The words were not spoken aloud, but rather felt, deep in the soul's very essence, reverberating through every fiber of its being. The voice was ancient, familiar, and yet strange, as if it had always been there, waiting to be heard. The soul stopped, its form flickering with uncertainty. "Who are you?" it thought, the question tumbling from its mind like a distant echo. The storm shifted again, and the voice spoke once more, the words carrying a weight of eons behind them. "I am the storm, the chaos, the beginning and the end. I am the force that shapes worlds. I am the one who guides the cycle, and I have been waiting for you." The soul's mind reeled. The storm, the chaos, the force that had shaped everything, the very essence of creation itself. The realization hit like a blow to the chest. "You," the soul began, "you are part of the cycle. You are the force that fuels it. But why are you here?" The storm did not respond with words, but with a violent surge of wind, pulling at the soul, drawing it into the heart of the chaos. The soul fought against the pull, its form flickering, wavering, as the winds roared around it. "You are the first," the storm whispered, its voice dark and powerful. "The first to awaken, the first to remember, the first to realize that the cycle is not merely a force of creation. It is a test." A test? The soul's mind raced. What kind of test? What did it mean? What was the storm preparing it for? "You are not just part of the cycle," the voice continued, its presence like a heavy weight pressing down on the soul. "You are its judge. You will decide if the cycle continues or if it ends." The words were a cold shock to the soul's being. It had no idea what the storm was saying, what its role was meant to be. Judge the cycle? End the cycle? How could it? A being born of the very forces of creation, decide the fate of everything. The storm twisted again, and the soul was pulled closer, its form nearly consumed by the swirling chaos. For a moment, it feared it might be torn apart, but then, just as quickly, the storm released its grip. "You must learn," the storm said, the voice softer now, though still as powerful. "You must learn what it means to hold the cycle in your hands. You must understand the nature of creation and destruction. Only then will you know if you are ready to decide the fate of the universe." The soul's awareness stretched, its mind reaching out into the storm, into the very fabric of existence itself. It felt the ancient energy of the storm, felt its power coursing through the very air, through the land, through the stars. It was the force of creation, of death, of rebirth, and now it had been given a responsibility that the soul could not yet comprehend. For a brief moment, the soul wondered if it had been made to bear this burden alone. But then, from the edges of the storm, another presence emerged. A flicker of light, soft and familiar, like a distant memory. The soul turned toward it, its form flickering once more. And in that brief moment of recognition, it felt Ethan and Mira, their essences, their souls, surrounding it, guiding it, comforting it. They had not been lost. They had not vanished. They were part of the storm, and so was the soul. "You are not alone," Ethan's voice whispered through the winds. "We are here with you. We are always with you. You are the future of the cycle, but you are never separate from the past. We are all connected. We always have been." The soul stood tall against the storm, feeling the pull of its ancient power. It had a purpose now, though it could not yet understand the full weight of that purpose. It was both the child of the cycle and the judge of its fate. And with that realization, the storm began to shift once more, its shape growing clearer, less chaotic. The darkness receded, and in its place, a soft light emerged from the heart of the tempest, glowing with the ancient energy of the stars. The soul stepped forward into the light, feeling the weight of the cycle on its shoulders. The storm had calmed, its chaotic winds now replaced by a steady, eerie silence. The clouds above parted slowly, revealing the twin moons in their full glory. Their pale light bathed the valley in a soft, haunting glow, casting long shadows that danced across the ground. The storm had not truly gone away. It had only transformed, its fierce energy now coiled like a sleeping serpent beneath the surface of the world. The first soul stood in the center of the transformed storm, its ethereal form solidifying further as the chaos around it slowly dissipated. It felt different, changed somehow, its connection to the world and the stars now stronger than ever. But the understanding it had gained was still incomplete. The storm had spoken of a trial, of a choice that would shape the future of the cycle. Yet the soul did not yet know how to face that decision. "You are the future," the storm's voice echoed, no longer as distant or ominous, but instead infused with an almost reverent tone. "But the future is not always what it seems. To hold the cycle in your hands, you must understand its heart. Only then can you decide what will come next." The soul breathed, or felt, its essence expanding, reaching into the world around it. It could sense the land, the stars, and the distant galaxies. But it also felt something else, a dark, distant force that tugged at the fabric of existence, threatening to unravel the very core of the universe. "What is that?" the soul asked, its voice barely a whisper in the vastness of space. "That is the void," the storm responded, its voice heavy with age and sorrow. "The absence of creation, the force that stands at the edge of all things. It is the antithesis of the cycle, the force that seeks to erase all that is, all that will be. The void is the shadow that lies beneath the stars." The first soul recoiled, instinctively pulling away from the darkness that seemed to ripple just beyond its reach. The void felt wrong, unnatural, like a wound in the universe, a space where nothing could exist. And yet, it was a part of the cycle, an inevitable consequence of the balance between creation and destruction. The void is as much a part of the cycle as the stars themselves. The storm continued. It is not to be feared, but understood. Without the void, there can be no creation. Without destruction, there can be no rebirth. The cycle exists in balance, a delicate dance between the two forces. Your role is to choose the path of that balance. The soul stood still, its form flickering between light and shadow as it tried to comprehend the enormity of its responsibility. It had known the cycle was a force beyond understanding, but now it felt its true weight. It was not just the judge of the cycle, it was the embodiment of its future. The soul had to decide the path forward. But to do so, it needed to understand both the light and the dark, the forces that had shaped the universe since time immemorial. The storm began to shift once again, its dark clouds parting to reveal something new, a vision. A city of stone and light, vast and sprawling, with towering structures that seemed to stretch toward the stars themselves. The buildings were carved from the very rock of the world, their surfaces glowing with ancient symbols and runes. The city hummed with life, but there was something unsettling about it. The people who lived there, if they could be called people, were not truly alive. They moved like shadows, their forms flickering in and out of existence, their faces devoid of expression. This is what happens when the cycle is not balanced, the storm explained. The city is a remnant of a past world, one that was consumed by the void. It was a world that failed to recognize the importance of destruction in the cycle. The people there tried to create without understanding the need for balance, and the void consumed them. The soul watched the vision unfold before it, feeling the weight of the loss and the sorrow that permeated the city. The people who once lived there were gone, their souls lost to the void. The city itself was now a hollow shell, a monument to the failed cycle of creation. It was a warning, a glimpse of what could happen if the balance was broken. But there is hope, the storm whispered. You, child of the cycle, are the key. You can restore balance. You can decide whether creation will continue or whether the void will consume it all. The choice is yours. The soul trembled, its form flickering with uncertainty. It had known that it carried the weight of the cycle within it, but it had not understood how fragile that balance truly was. Creation and destruction, light and dark, were two sides of the same coin. To preserve the future, the soul would need to understand both and make the choice that would guide the universe forward. The vision of the city began to fade, replaced by the swirling darkness of the void once again. But this time, the soul did not pull away. It reached into the void, its essence stretching out, seeking to understand it, to embrace it. It felt the cold, empty void wrap around it, but instead of fear, the soul felt a deep sense of understanding. The void was not something to be feared. It was a part of the cycle, a necessary force. Without it, there could be no creation. Without it, there could be no change. The soul realized that it was not just the judge of creation, it was the keeper of balance. It was the one who would ensure that the cycle continued, that light and darkness would always exist in harmony. And with that realization, the soul knew what it must do. It must restore balance to the cycle, not by rejecting the void, but by embracing it. By understanding both creation and destruction, the soul could shape the future, guide the next cycle, and ensure that the universe would continue to evolve. The storm, now quiet, watched the soul with silent approval. The dark clouds parted completely, revealing the vast expanse of stars above, their light shining brighter than ever before. You have chosen, the storm murmured. The cycle will continue. The future is yours to shape. The soul stood beneath the stars, its form glowing with newfound purpose. It had made its choice. It had embraced both the light and the dark, and in doing so, it had become the keeper of the cycle. The future was no longer a mystery. It was a canvas, waiting to be painted with the choices of the soul. And as the first soul turned away from the storm, it felt the weight of its responsibility, but it also felt a deep sense of peace. The cycle would continue, and the universe, with all its light and darkness, would find its balance.